The Life of Asta, Black Clover. Asta is an orphan raised under the care of a church in Hage after his mother abandons him on the church's doorstep. After turning 15, Asta receives a 5-leaf Clover grimoire with an anti-magic devil inside. He joins the Clover Kingdom's Black Bull squad of the Magic Knights and becomes a 3rd-class junior Magic Knight and temporarily a Royal Knight. Welcome to the Imagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Asta. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Imagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. As infants, Asta and Yuno are left at the doorstep of a church in Hage. Since then, they've spent their childhood in the church with the other orphans. One day, during their trip home from grocery shopping, Asta overhears a couple of villagers coveting the lifestyle of those who live in the noble region. On this day, Asta learns of the discrimination that the people of the Forsaken region receive and reveals his intention to be the Magic Emperor for the first time, also called the Wizard King in the English dub of the anime, but for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna keep calling it the Magic Emperor just so there's no confusion. Sometime later, Asta sees a thug snatch Yuno's necklace and immediately steps in to get his friend's item back. His endeavor is a success, but the young orphan is left with injuries all over his body. Fortunately, Sister Lily of the church is able to heal him with her magic. One day, Asta and Yuno go into the forest of Hage and stand atop a hill where they face towards the noble region. Asta then starts talking about their relationship as a family despite their lack of a blood connection. Yuno agrees with Asta and asks him the reason behind the latter's sudden illusion. Asta then makes another promise with Yuno, that they'll treat their future comrades as family just like the way they treat each other. Asta and Yuno also practice their magic from time to time, with Asta usually trying to break through Yuno's wind magic attacks. Yuno tries to convince Asta to stop as Asta fails every time. Unfortunately, the latter refuses to give up and continues to charge toward Yuno. Finally, at one point, Asta manages to break through Yuno's magic and land an attack. He then subsequently tells Yuno that his persistence is the source of his success. One might say that Asta's magic is never giving up. Years later, Asta confesses his undying love to Sister Lily, but is quickly rejected for what is apparently the 1000th time. He insists even after she forcefully silences him. He finally stops his approach when Yuno interrupts him. After many failed attempts to show his skills while Yuno overshadows him, Asta storms away to train on his own. A few days later, a grimoire acceptance ceremony is held in a town near Hage. Asta fails to receive his grimoire, and the master of the grimoire tower suggests, well, better luck next year. Later in the evening, Asta is still left in a daze after Yuno also brushed off his declaration of rivalry. In the distance, while he hangs on a tree branch, Asta sees that Yuno is in trouble and quickly runs to save him. However, because of his lack of magical power, Asta is cornered by Revchi Salik, who is armed with a grimoire. Unable to retaliate, Asta submits as his spirit is shaven off by Revchi. He manages to regain his will to fight, however, after Yuno reveals his respect for Asta during their time as children. Asta then tries to get back on his feet when a grimoire suddenly flies towards Asta and gives him a sword. Using this newfound sword, Asta defeats Revchi and reinforces his promise with Yuno. 6 months later, Asta attends the Magic Knight's entrance exam where he meets Yami Tsukihiro, Finral Rulacase, and Gordon Agrippa for the first time. During the exam, Asta is naturally unable to perform the first tasks given to him. Fellow aspiring knight, Seke Bronzaza, plans to use Asta's poor performance to his advantage. At the end, during the combat tests, Seke asks Asta to be his partner, to which Asta gladly accepts. Seke then condescendingly reveals his reason behind his decision to have Asta be his partner, which, is to make him look good because Asta sucks at everything. Nevertheless, Asta quickly defeats him with the power of concussions and reveals his intention to become the Magic Emperor for like the 1000th time in 4 episodes. And even though he just bodied this dude, everyone's like, bro, what's your name again? Unfortunately, because of his use of unfamiliar magic, none of the captains want to recruit him. The captain of the Black Bull squad then steps in to test Asta's determination. The young orphan manages to impress Yami and he's offered a place in his squad. He then travels to the squad's headquarters via spatial magic and introduces himself to the other members of the squad. A colorful bunch, but they're good people. One of the members, Magna Swing, decides to give Asta an initiation test to prove his worth to the squad. Asta impresses Magna when he deflects his attack back towards him. Additionally, Magna remains impressed of his ability even when Asta reveals his lack of magical power. The young knight is then congratulated by the other members before he receives his robe, while Vanessa Anoteka brands his headband with the squad's insignia. After the test, while being taken on a tour of the headquarters, Asta meets Noelle Silva, the other new member of the squad. She also happens to be the sister of Nozel, captain of the Silver Eagles. He tries to be friendly with her, but the latter completely rejects Asta's good intentions as she mentions her royalty status. Afterwards, Magna takes Asta to the latter's personal quarters. The notion of having his own room deeply excites Asta as he started cleaning every corner of it before he goes to sleep. Later at dawn, Asta finds Noelle where she practices on her own. Suddenly, he witnesses her magical power go out of control. Yami, who quickly arrives at the scene, orders Asta to stop her magic as he throws the young knight towards Noelle. Asta is able to control things with the use of his anti-magic and lands safely on the ground with Finral's assistance. He then begins to praise Noelle's ability while also encouraging her to grow stronger. During mealtime, Asta asks about the duty of a magic knight, which Magna chides him for his ignorance. However, after he heard his squad mate's interpretation of their duty, Asta simply concludes that they're all weird. Later on, Magna reveals to Asta and Noelle that their first mission will be boar hunting in Sosi. Asta rejects the mission at first, but quickly accepts it after he's threatened by Yami. The three of them then travel to the village on Magna's broom, because Asta can't ride one himself, and Finral is unable to transport them with his magic. Upon their arrival, they discover that the village is covered in mist, which Magna quickly asks Asta to cut a path for them. The moment they reach the center of the village, they find the villagers are being held hostage by a group of mages led by Heath Grice. Once Magna saves the villagers, Heath launches a second attack, which Asta counters with his sword before he confronts Heath for his actions. Asta begins his assault while he tries to uncover Heath's true purpose. Unfortunately, Heath's answers quickly infuriate him and causes Asta to proclaim that he will protect the villagers from him. Heath and his group launch a combination spell that keeps Asta and Magna occupied and unable to protect the villagers. Fortunately, Noelle casts a protection spell that shields all of them from their attacks. Asta quickly dashes towards Heath as soon as he sees an opening, but he fails to give effective damage because Heath had dampened Asta's momentum by freezing his standing ground. He then begins to receive a lot of damage from Heath, but still manages to regain his stance. Subsequently, Magna steps out of Noelle's spell and asks Asta to redo their initiation ceremony. Their strategy succeeds, and Asta quickly delivers the final attack and defeats Heath. Asta faints as soon as Heath is defeated, but he's immediately awoken by an anti-bird which followed him from the entrance exam. When Asta sees the anti-bird carrying a stone, which belongs to the village's chief, he tries to have it returned, but the villagers decide to give it to him. After that, Asta witnesses Heath commit suicide to protect his retainer's information, which deeply shocks him. Asta later runs around with the anti-bird constantly pecking him while being followed by Noelle. He then has a chance meeting with Nick, the chief's grandson, to whom he gives words of encouragement. Having returned to headquarters, the three knights report back to Yami, who praises them for their work. Yami then gives them their salary, which quickly excites Asta. Vanessa subsequently offers Asta and Noelle to go on a shopping trip to Kika. As they arrive, Asta becomes excited with the new experience and wishes that he could take the Hage villagers with him. After they're finished with their errands, Vanessa takes both of them to the castle town's black market, where Asta spots Magna at the casino. Additionally, the young knight encounters Seke, who tries to flirt with Vanessa and Noelle. A conversation later, a thief snatches an old lady's bag, so Asta quickly chases and immobilizes him before Seke delivers the final strike. Unfortunately, Seke finds himself paralyzed and attempts to give his final words, but Asta quickly stops and motivates him before Seke learns from Vanessa that he's fine. Asta returns the bag to the old lady and leaves with his squad mates. Sometime later, Yami informs Asta and the other Black Bull members about the appearance of a new dungeon. The Black Bull captain then explains that Julius Novachrono, the current Magic Emperor, has requested Asta to explore it, which quickly excites Asta, even though he knows nothing about dungeons. He then travels to the dungeon, which is located at the edge of the kingdom, along with Noelle and Luck Voltia. Immediately after, Asta drops their source of light, which causes them to walk in the dark before they reach the inner side of the dungeon. Asta then accidentally activates a trap when he whines about his inability to sense mana within the dungeon, but he's able to easily handle it. Asta and Noelle, however, face against numerous other traps, as Luck playfully activates all of them before he leaves them on their own. Another trap quickly emerges and immobilizes Asta. However, Yuno arrives at the scene and effortlessly saves him. Asta and Yuno's reunion is quickly set aside when Yuno's senior, Klaus Lunetz, begins a conversation with the Black Bull members where he believes that saving them is unnecessary. Asta and Klaus then start a series of arguments with Noelle and her cousin Mimosa Vermilion on their respective sides. At the end, Asta is unable to give an answer when Klaus asks them the whereabouts of Luck, and the argument begins to move towards the reputation of their captains. As the Golden Dawn members leave to conquer the dungeon, Asta and Noelle also begin their search for the center of the dungeon. Noelle starts to question their searching method because none of them possess any magic that could help them. They continue in their search to find the center of the dungeon when Asta suddenly stops after he hears a peculiar noise. Noelle infers the possibility of it being the sound from Luck's fight. Asta quickly suggests that they assist him, but Noelle argues by saying that their current priority is to conquer the dungeon. However, Asta decides to help Luck and manages to negate a spell that's about to kill him. When Luck's opponent, Lotus Humalt, asks for Asta's identity, he simply says that he's Luck's comrade. In contrast, Luck refuses Asta's help and charges towards his opponent. However, when Lotus is about to counterattack him, Asta interferes as he ignores Luck's request. Luck finally agrees to fight the Diamond Kingdom's mage together, but the opponent immediately traps them within a shroud of thick smoke. Asta tries to cut the smoke multiple times, but he quickly grows anxious due to its unlimited amount. As soon as Luck notices something after he remarked their opponent's sensory ability, he launches a barrage of lightning-based spell attacks to guide Lotus at a certain direction while Noelle prepares to launch Asta towards him with her spell. Asta then delivers a wide swing at Lotus, and the latter remarks that he never encountered an opponent without magical power. Lotus then escapes along with his injured subordinates, and Asta fails to pursue him. Luck then suggests that they return to the main objective and head to the center of the dungeon. Upon arriving, Asta quickly activates his magic and saves Yuno from an attack. He then starts arguing with Yuno about the latter's circumstances, but decides to stop and join the fight. The fight begins as Mars creates multiple clone puppets with his magic. While Asta is able to easily destroy the puppet, the rest of the Black Bull and Golden Dawn members have a tougher time against them. Mars tries to launch another attack after he recreated the sword that was destroyed by Asta, but Asta easily cuts it apart. Asta then quickly dashes towards him and manages to break his armor and blow him away into the surrounding pool. However, Mars quickly prepares another attack by covering himself with an even larger armor. Mars's attack through the said armor is unable to give Asta significant damage, but the latter is still able to hold it together while sharing his ambition to protect. Mars tries to ignore him and launch another attack, but Asta manages to break through and render him unconscious. After Klaus restrains Mars, the Clover Kingdom's Magic Knights finally enter the center of the dungeon as Asta cuts down the door to the treasury. They are immediately in awe with the sight of treasures stored behind the said door. Asta quickly dashes in and starts tinkering with various magic tools within, until Nero forcefully leads him to a wall with a similar locking mechanism as the treasury door, albeit smaller, attached to it. Nero then starts pecking on his head when Asta expresses his lack of understanding of Nero's hints. Suddenly, Mars barges into the treasury and manages to land critical damage on Noelle. As soon as Asta sees it, he immediately charges toward the Diamond Kingdom's mage, but is easily overpowered by Mars's new fighting strategy. The latter also manages to send Asta flying through the wall that Nero was showing him. Feeling helpless and unable to find any solutions to counter Mars, Asta sees Nero fly past him and further into the hidden room behind the wall. When Asta turns his head, he sees Nero landing on top of a sword covered in dirt. Asta quickly grabs the sword and manages to save both Mimosa and Noelle just in time from Mars's incoming attacks. He then rushes towards Mars and is able to land an attack, but Mars's healing spell is preventing Asta from giving him any significant damage. Suddenly, Noelle finally regains consciousness after Mars attacked her and immediately orders Asta to end the fight. Asta accepts her request and throws a slash to defend himself against Mars's incoming attacks. However, to his surprise, a stream of water is coming out of his sword as he neutralizes Mars's attacks. But Asta, unfortunately, is unable to completely stop his previous attack as a blade pierces his stomach. Asta then falls to the ground as he loses consciousness. After Yuno defeats Mars in an instant, Asta's newfound sword suddenly enters his grimoire with unknown writings appearing on the pages. Subsequently, the dungeon begins to collapse, and the fainted Asta is immediately taken by Luck as Yuno prepares a vessel for them to escape. Before he completely loses consciousness, Asta tries to reason with Klaus on taking on Mars with them. Unfortunately, they fail to fulfill Asta's wish and head towards the exit. As soon as they're outside, Asta is taken to a safer place for Mimosa to continue her healing process. The moment Asta awakes, Klaus quickly hugs him alongside Yuno as he acknowledges the two orphans. After the mission, Asta falls asleep for a week before he's awakened and given an order to give his report regarding his mission to the Magic Knight headquarters. When he arrives with Noelle, the couple meet with Klaus, Mimosa, and Yuno, where all of them head to the designated venue together. As they arrive, the five of them are welcomed by the Magic Emperor himself, as the latter then examines the magic that Asta and Yuno managed to take from the dungeon. Asta shows the Emperor the writings that appeared in his grimoire, while also presenting the sword that could be summoned from it. Subsequently, he asks the Emperor about the method they should use to become the Magic Emperor, to which the latter gives him an interesting answer. Asta, along with the others, are then invited by Julius to attend a War Merits Conferment ceremony that honors Magic Knights with the best achievements. As soon as the ceremony ends, Asta then attends a banquet in which he quickly enjoys the fine dishes served while ignoring the scrutiny of the honorary Magic Knights. However, once those knights start insulting Klaus, Yuno, and Mimosa, Asta begins to lose his composure. The latter reaches his boiling point when Noelle is humiliated by her own siblings, in which he then declares that he'll silence all of them by becoming the Magic Emperor. Asta's confrontation is not received well by the honorary knights, as Nebra Silva, Alec-Dora Sandler, and Solid Silva try to put him in his place. Using his anti-magic, Asta swiftly manages to neutralize all of their attacks until Nozel decides to enter the fray. Nozel's intense burst of magical power reminds Asta of Yami's own burst of magical power during his entrance exam to the Magic Knights, and it sends chills to his body. Luckily, Fuegoleon Vermilion, captain of the Crimson Lion, stops Nozel from acting even further, while his brother, Leopold Vermilion, declares Asta as his rival. Not long after, someone enters the hall of the banquet and warns the knights that the royal capital is under attack. After the sudden announcement, Asta then joins his fellow knights as they discuss their strategy for counterattacks. However, he immediately leaves them as he expresses that they're taking too long while the citizens are being attacked. Not long after, Asta manages to find the perpetrator of the invasion, Rades Spirito, as he defeats all of his opponents along his way. When he arrives, Asta immediately proclaims that he'll protect everything that Rades wishes to destroy, as he also manages to secure a little girl from the man. Hearing Asta's determination, Rades summons more corpses to attack Asta, but the boy is able to easily immobilize all of them. However, when Asta charges towards him, Rades summons a different and more powerful corpse, number 4, Jimmy. After Jimmy manages to scratch Asta's face with one of his magic bullets, Rades reveals that the bullets are composed of curse power as Asta begins to bleed from it. Rades then proceeds on ordering Jimmy to unleash a barrage attacks on Asta, but the latter is able to easily defend himself. Seeing this, Rades orders Jimmy to shift his attention to the little girl behind Asta. Asta immediately steps in front of her as he's forced into the defensive, trying to prevent any of the bullets hitting her. A bullet manages to scratch Asta on his side as he begins to bleed quite extensively. The said wound distorts Asta's concentration as several bullets are about to hit the little girl. Luckily, Noel enters the fray and takes over the duty to protect the little girl. Asta immediately charges towards Jimmy, but Rades summons a number of corpses to prevent his advancement. However, Asta is able to go past them as Leopold assists him by burning all of the summoned corpses. While having both swords in hand, Asta manages to take Jimmy down and challenges Rades to a fight. Unfortunately, his opponent doesn't take to the challenge and summons another corpse, number 2, Alfred. Asta quickly struggles in the fight against Alfred as the corpse is constantly discharging lightning attacks and preventing him from closing the distance. As his wounds from his fight against Jimmy are getting worse, Asta's finally at the point where he's unable to avoid Alfred's attack. Luckily, Fuegoleon intercepts the attack by incinerating the corpse before taking over the fight from Asta. After hearing that Fuegoleon is acknowledging him, Asta tries to continue his fight before being stopped by the former. The Crimson Lion's captain then asks Asta to watch and learn from his fight against Rades. Seeing a captain fighting in front of his eyes, Asta is quickly amazed by Fuegoleon's charismatic act of intimidating his opponent while raising his allies' morale. After hearing that the fight is over and that Fuegoleon has restrained Rades, Asta begins to talk to the captive about his approach of getting acknowledgement over his talents. A moment later, Asta hears a faint voice coming from Rades' direction before Fuegoleon is suddenly teleported away from them. While Noel is trying to locate the perpetrator, Asta quickly charges towards a pile of corpses and smashes it apart and sees Valtos, the spatial magic user, come out of his hiding place. The man opens another portal from which he drops the body of Fuegoleon, quickly filling Asta with shock and anger. While trying to push his confusion over Fuegoleon's defeat to the back of his mind, Asta quickly prevents Rades from escaping by nullifying Valtos' spatial magic spell. He then manages to cut Rades' face before engaging in a fistfight against him. However, reinforcements for Rades and Valtos arrive as they surround the Clover Kingdom's knights. Seeing that they're at a disadvantage, Asta nullifies the curse power that's been deteriorating his wounds and challenges his opponents in a fight as he tries to overcome the adversity. The fight begins with the 5 mages launching simultaneous attacks towards Asta, who manages to deflect them all. However, the mages easily neutralize the deflected attacks. The young knight then continues his ferocious assaults on his opponents alongside Leopold. In the middle of the fight, Noel tries to protect them with a barrier spell, but one of the mages is able to easily neutralize it. As they take advantage of the situation, Asta and Leopold charge towards one of the mages as Noel's barrier is disappearing. However, their attempt to attack fails as the said mage launches several attacks which cause critical damage on both of them. Said attacks render Asta unconscious as he remains on the ground. The mages then try to both kill Asta and Leopold, but the remaining knights whom were sent away by Valtos return and intercept the attack. The mages who identified themselves as members of the Eye of the Midnight Sun escape while also taking Asta with them. When Asta regains consciousness, they've already arrived at the Eye of the Midnight Sun's hideout. The young knight remains helpless as he's trapped within Sally's magic spell, a mage who's eager to dissect him and his grimoire. When they finally enter the hideout, Julius reveals himself and swiftly defeats 3 of the mages while restraining the rest of the Eye of the Midnight Sun's mages. Asta finally breaks free of Sally's spell after said mage is restrained. He then can only sit in amazement and fear after seeing the feats which were done by the man he needs to surpass in order to become the Magic Emperor. After seeing Julius's power firsthand, Asta's feet become numb as he forces himself to stand up after the Magic Emperor lent his hand. Not long after, while Julius questions the Eye of the Midnight Sun members about a Sephiroth in their hideout, a bright light manifests and prevents Asta from seeing the culprit. When it recedes, Asta realizes that the rogue mages have gone, but Julius is able to secure one of them. Asta's then taken back to the royal capital by Julius after receiving an update from Marx Francois, one of his aides. Once they arrive, Asta is greeted by Noel, Klaus, Mimosa, and Nero, who are very relieved when they see the young knight. Asta then remains with his fellow knights as Julius addresses them in regards to the conflict with the Eye of the Midnight Sun. When Nozel decides to leave as soon as the Emperor is done, Asta expresses his confusion over the Silver Eagle captain's lack of camaraderie. Not long after, Leopold comes out of the medical ward and vows to become the next Magic Emperor, in which Asta accepts him as one of his rivals. He then asks Leopold to properly introduce himself to him. Not long after, Asta, Charmy, and Noel prepare to leave the royal capital, but they end up lost within the city. As they stroll around while having a conversation, they encounter Yuno, Klaus, and Mimosa. The moment Asta strikes a conversation with Yuno, the latter immediately launches an attack towards the Black Bull members. Asta manages to nullify it and finds out that Yuno used this spell as his farewell towards his foster brother. Afterwards, at the Black Bull's headquarters, Asta greets Magna and Luck, who have just returned from their mission. The young knight then tells his senior that he's been promoted to a third-class junior magic knight. However, both of them fail to comprehend Asta's attempt to boast himself until Yami explains the significance of it. Asta then relays his worries over Fuegoleon to his captain, but Yami manages to cheer him up before he tells him to rest. Suddenly, Finral arrives through his spatial magic and invites Asta to a blind date. Later that day, at a restaurant in Nairn, Asta attends a blind date with Finral and Luck. As his seniors finish their introductions, the young Black Bull mage also introduces himself. Unfortunately, his speech is not received well by the ladies, so he shows off the wounds that he received during the royal capital's invasion, which further reduces their interest in him. As Luck and Finral are finally able to have a lively conversation with their dates, Asta also tries to break the ice with his date, Rebecca Scarlet. She reveals her intention and disinterest as she prefers to stay with her siblings. In response, Asta begins to tell her about his own foster siblings, which quickly grabs her interest, and they're able to have a topic of interest. Suddenly, a drunk, burly man interrupts them and begins to insult Rebecca by mocking her living situation. Asta immediately puts the drunkard in his place by throwing him across the hall. His action prompts Rebecca to take him away from the restaurant into an alley. She then asks Asta whether he has someone of romantic interest. The Black Bull Knight confirms it, but he refrains from revealing her identity as his thoughts are filled with the image of Sister Lily. Subsequently, Rebecca invites Asta to play with her siblings sometime, which he is in agreement to. He then asks Rebecca the true purpose of this blind date, which quickly stuns her. The next day, Asta returns to Nairn to play with Rebecca's siblings. He meets with a little girl named Marie Adley, who ends up playing with them. When Asta tries to take her for a spin, Marie's older brother, Gauche Adley, immediately interferes and kicks him down. As the Black Bull mage quickly identifies Marie's older brother as his senior in the squad, the latter beats him further when Marie reveals her intention to marry Asta. A while later, after Marie returns to the church, Asta and Gauche decide to spend the night at Rebecca's house. The young knight quickly praises Rebecca's cooking skill after he tastes her dishes. When night falls and Asta is fast asleep, he's suddenly attacked by Gauche, who's determined to kill him for bonding with Marie. The Black Bull Knight tries to reason with his senior, but he fails, and the latter manages to push him out of the house. The moment Asta realizes that the town has been covered in snow, Rebecca comes in and informs of the disappearance of her siblings. Afterward, the other citizens of Nairn begin to wake up and discover that their children are gone. While Asta still tries to evade Gauche's assault, Noelle comes along and informs them that she saw a group of children walking towards the mountain area. At that moment, the sisters of the church arrive and reveal that the children of the church have gone missing as well. The fact that Marie has also been kidnapped quickly infuriates Gauche as he tries to vent his anger towards Sister Teresa. Fortunately, Asta manages to stop him and asks him to calm down by hitting him. As the young knight urges his senior to use the time to look for hints of the children's whereabouts, it reminds Gauche of the mirror which he gave to Marie that he could use to trace them. Asta, Gauche, and Teresa then leave Nairn to pursue the children after the young knight assures Rebecca of her siblings' safety. As they near the cave, Asta spots Marco Scarlet lying outside and asks Gauche to get closer. Gauche refuses and tells Asta to let go, which he does. Teresa joins Asta next to Marco, and Asta taps the boy on the head with the Demon Slayer sword, freeing the boy from the enchantment. After being healed, Marco doesn't want to be left alone, so Asta lends him the Black Bull squad robe as comfort. When Asta and Teresa arrive in the cave, she notices that the children's mana has been drained and may never be able to use magic, which infuriates Asta. As Barrow mocks them for not having mana, Asta hits him with the Demon Slayer sword. Asta threatens Barrow and punches the wall next to his head, saying that beating up Barrow won't undo the damage to the children. Asta then frees the children from the enchantment. As she heals the children, Teresa mentions to Asta that she knows Sister Lily, who described the boy as short and loud, but is proud of his hard work ethic, much to Asta's delight. Asta demands to know how to return the children's mana. Suddenly, Sally appears from a portal and is delighted to see Asta. Asta warns the others about her. After Gauche's spells prove ineffective against her gel magic, Sally grabs Asta and pulls him onto her salamander, where she tastes his blood. As Sally tries to remove his pinky fingernail, Teresa frees the boy with fire magic. Asta is surprised to learn that Teresa was a magic knight and knows Fuegoleon and asks if she had heard what happened to him, which she confirms. When Sally turns Barrow into a giant mud monster, Asta and Teresa move to defend the children while Ghost grabs Marie and flies away. While fighting the monster, Asta saves Hage from being smashed because he still has to pay for what he has done. Asta tries cutting the monster to pieces, but Sally reveals that its overwhelming magic is fooled by Barrow's life force. Teresa then saves Asta again from Sally's attempt to capture him. When Ghost returns, he finds Asta and Teresa exhausted, but Asta still refuses to give up. Asta declares that he'll die before letting the children be harmed and rushes in but has to be saved by Ghost. When Ghosh's spells prove ineffective, Asta saves his squadmate and tells him that they need to work together as a team. Ghosh agrees, which causes the Demon Dweller's sword to appear and it fills with Ghosh's magic. Asta swings the sword and releases a flying slash of anti-magic light. Ghosh then has Asta look into his mirror eye and multiplies the boy. The multiple Astas all swing their swords and destroy the monster with Mirror's slash. After the clones dissipate, Asta is attacked by Barrow, but Hage freezes his brother. Hage asks if they can be friends after he serves time in prison, and Asta agrees and thanks Hage for saving him. Suddenly, Hage and Ghosh are struck down by blades of light. Asta carries Hage over to the others behind Teresa, who raises a defense. However, she's struck down too. Asta then notices that Sally has disappeared and recognizes Licht, who formally introduces himself. Asta is then shocked to see that Licht has a 4-leaf clover grimoire like you know. Confused by Licht's speech about his victims, Asta points out that the Eye of the Midnight Sun attacked first. Rebuking the statement, Licht pierces Asta's leg and asks about the boy's grimoire. Asta tries to hide behind his larger sword, but Licht appears behind him and attacks. To Asta's surprise, Yami drops out of a portal and blocks the attack. Asta asks Finral to carry the injured back to Nairn and stays behind to keep fighting. Asta is impressed by Yami's ability to block Licht's attacks. Asta listens but gets confused as Licht and Yami relate their backstories. The boy is shocked when Licht admits to injuring Fuegoleon. After Yami injures Licht, the captain tells Asta to do the same, much to the boy's disbelief. Yami then instructs Asta in how to use Ki and orders him to take out Valtos. Asta listens for Valtos' attack but is still hit, and Yami kicks him for just using his ears. He needs to use all of his senses. Asta concentrates and manages to reflect Valtos' attack back, hitting him in the chest. Angered, Licht lashes out and causes a cave-in, but Asta and Yami use Ki to dodge the rocks. Yami orders Asta to take on Licht, but changing his mind, orders the boy to finish fighting Valtos. Asta is distracted by Yami and Licht's fight, and Valtos tries to interfere. Yami then threatens Asta again for not dealing with Valtos. Asta charges forward, and Valtos attacks from multiple angles at once. Asta reflects some of them back, but Valtos escapes before they hit. As the assault continues, Asta's numerous injuries are taking their toll. In a desperate attempt, Asta tosses his swords aside, tempting Valtos to fire a larger attack. Asta then jumps through the portal and punches Valtos. Asta marvels at Yami's massive injury to Licht. When Licht decides to unleash his most powerful spell, Asta believes Yami can handle it, but the captain reveals that it's too much for him. Asta panics while Yami tries to construct a defense. Ghosh saves them by reflecting the spell with a giant mirror. Yami compliments Ghosh on defeating Licht and then walks over to Licht and tells him that his light magic has another natural enemy. Licht replies that he can't bring himself to hurt Ghosh and also says that the truth will come to light when they don't understand him. Yami then tries to restrain Licht with his dark magic but notices that 3 more people have arrived. One of them gets close enough to touch Yami's grimoire. Yami counters with a spell that manages to cut the guy's arm, but the guy heals himself with light magic. Another uses fire healing magic to heal Licht. Licht tells Asta and the group that the 3 mages are a group called the Third Eye and that all 3 are stronger than him. Licht also reveals that they're the opposite of the kingdom's Clover symbol. Licht introduces one as Raya, the Treachery, who uses imitation magic to copy Yami's dark magic to attack. Yami complains about Raya using his magic and counters the attack. Licht introduces another as Veto, the Despair, who uses beast magic to destroy Yami's katana. Licht then introduces the last one as Fauna, the Hatred, who uses spirit magic to attack a complaining Yami. Yami continues to counter the 3's attacks until 3 other Magic Knight captains, Nozel Silva, Charlotte Roselay, and Jack the Ripper, arrive to help. When Asta decides to join in the fight, Nozel stops him and tells him that he'll only get in the way. Veto gets excited about facing new opponents and encourages the other 2 join him. Raya agrees to fight for Licht and charges at Charlotte. Jack attacks Veto with his slash magic, which Veto easily dodges. Veto notices that Jack is the captain of the Green Mantis, and Jack tells him not to underestimate him. Nozel decides to attack Licht, but Fauna blocks the attack with her fire magic. Everyone notices how intense the battle is, however Licht says that the captains will ultimately lose to them since they're loved by Mana. Licht then thinks about how they have to get the grimoire that Asta has back, but notices that Yami has appeared from above. Licht prepares to counter Yami until Asta suddenly shows up and wounds Licht with his sword. Yami compliments Asta for surpassing his limits and wounding Licht. Licht suddenly begins to glow, and Veto reveals that the seal on Licht has been broken. Licht then angrily asks Asta why he has those swords, which Asta says that the grimoire and swords belong to him. The light within Licht then suddenly starts to expand, which Jack decides to attack, but his slash is absorbed by the light. Veto, Raya, and Fauna quickly surround Licht and seal him within Crystal, and then teleport themselves, Licht, and Valtos away. Jack, Nozel, and Charlotte think about how strong their opponents were and that they have to run away. Asta is excited that they have won, but he falls unconscious from exhaustion. Later, Asta wakes up in a room and wonders where he is. Marx Francois then appears and tells Asta that he's at the Magic Knight's headquarters and thanks Asta for his hard work. Marx then introduces himself and asks if Asta can help them with his anti-magic swords. Marx then compliments Asta again for all of his hard work while bringing him to an underground room. Once in the room, the Magic Emperor Julius rushes to Asta asking about the magic of the Eye of the Midnight Sun members. Marx stops Julius, and Julius asks Asta if he can use his sword to help them out. Asta brings out his sword and undoes the spell that's on two prisoners. Marx then activates his magic and begins to question them. The 7 squad captains then meet up where the prisoners are, and Charlotte asks Julius if they're able to get any information out of them. Julius replies that they're able to get a lot of information, actually. Julius then asks the prisoners who's working with them, which the prisoners reveal that Gelder Poizot is working with them. Gelder says that he would never betray the kingdom, but Charlotte and Jack say that they've heard that Gelder's had his hand in some dirty stuff. Gelder then says the prisoners are lying, but Marx says that his magic is absolute. Yami tells Gelder to just have Marx look into his memory to clear his name, but Gelder opts to take the high road and uses his magic to disappear, which is something that innocent people do. Charlotte reveals that Gelder's magic allows him to disappear and have all magic pass right through him. The captains try to go after Gelder, but he creates an army to block the captains. Gelder thinks about what he had to do to get to where he is, but Asta suddenly appears and attacks him. Asta manages to dispel Gelder's magic, but Gelder says that he's still Magic Knight captain. Rill Boy Mortier then uses his magic to restrain Gelder. Nozel asks what Rill is doing, which Rill replies that if he didn't step in, then the others would have brought the whole building down. Marx then uses his magic to reveal everything that Gelder had done. Julius tells the other captains not to reveal any of this to the public and to investigate their squads for other traitors. Later, in a room within the Magic Knight's headquarters, Julius apologizes to Yami and Asta for having them stay. Julius comments about how sad it is to be betrayed by a comrade and that he's probably made a lot of mistakes because he became the Magic Emperor so fast. Yami tells Julius that he picked the wrong guys if he just wanted to talk. Julius reveals to them that the Eye of the Midnight Sun are after jewels called magic stones, and that was the reason Fuegoleon Vermilion was targeted. Julius also says that they're not going to let them get the last 3 stones, and that they know the location of them. Julius reveals that one magic stone is located in a Grand Magic Zone, the Seabed Temple. Asta asks what a Grand Magic Zone is, which makes Yami angry and threatens to crush Asta's head for his ignorance. Julius tells Asta that a Grand Magic Zone is an area that has strong fields of mana that cause magical phenomena. Julius also says that the Seabed Temple is especially dangerous and that the dungeon that Asta conquered was just the tip of the iceberg. Yami says that their mission is to just get there and get the Magic Stone before the Eye of the Midnight Sun. Julius responds that it's only a job that the Black Bulls can do. Julius thinks that there has to be a traitor in the Magic Knights, and also wonders if Yami will even do the mission, but Yami says that he will if that's an order. Yami then salutes Julius and says that he's going to prove that Julius hasn't made any mistakes. Julius is pleased to hear Yami's answer and then tells Asta that his anti-magic will be a big help to the squad in the zone, and Asta then also salutes Julius while saying that he'll do his best. While Yami and Asta are leaving, Asta comments about how someone amazing has expected something of him, which has never really happened to him before. Yami slaps Asta's back and says that he led Asta into the Black Bull squad and to do his best, so, like, there's that. That happened beforehand. The Black Bulls then head out to Rockaway for their mission from the Magic Emperor, and also to have its requisite beach episode. A week later, Noelle's confidence wavers during her training. Noelle hears someone screaming, and Asta jumps toward her with a crab pinching his toe. Both find out that they were both training, and Asta suggests that they train together since he can help her if she loses control of her mana again. Noelle tells Asta that she's not going to lose control again, but he can stay if he wants. Suddenly, both of them hear singing and notice a girl on the beach. As Asta and Noelle wonder who the girl is, she notices that she's being watched and comments about how embarrassing this is, but she takes it all in stride. The girl decides to be friends with Asta and Noelle and introduces herself as Kahono. Noelle introduces herself and Asta as Dorksta, which Kahono comments about how that's a unique name. Asta replies that Noelle was just making fun of him by calling him that. Noelle then asks what Kahono is doing out here, and Kahono replies that she's practicing her singing. She also tells them about her dream of becoming an idol, while also explaining to them what an idol is. Kahono notices that Asta's fatigued and uses her magic to heal him, which amazes Noelle at how well Kahono's accuracy is. Kahono comments about how funny they are and asks how old they are, and they all find out that they're all 15. Kahono then asks if they'll be friends with her, a request that Asta and Noelle agree to with varying degrees of begrudgingness. Out of them becoming friends, Kahono tells Noelle that she's suppressing her mana too much and that that's the reason for her losing control. Kahono also explains how one can only truly concentrate after they clear their mind, to which Asta agrees and says that his best swings are from when he's not thinking. Kahono then asks what Noelle's best memories are and tells her to try thinking about her family, but Noelle just thinks about how her family just insults her for being a failure and how she doesn't like them that much, so it doesn't work. But Noelle thanks Kahono for the advice anyway and continues training. Afterwards, the Black Bulls enter the Seabed Temple and are directed to the High Priest, who pranks them with some of his magic. The High Priest tells the Black Bulls that if they want the Magic Stone, then they're gonna have to play a game. Magna asks the priest how he knows what they're after, and he says that these old eyes are a little special. The High Priest asks if they want to play, and Yami replies, sure, cause they don't have much other choice. Upon being asked what the game is, the priest says that they're gonna play the Temple Battle Royale and uses his magic to summon the other priests. He then uses his magic to teleport both the Black Bulls and the priests to other locations. The High Priest tells the players the rules of the game and that he'll also be interfering with the game to make it a little more fun. Asta, Gauche, Magna, and Luck each suddenly encounter an opponent whom the 4 Black Bulls easily defeat. Elsewhere, Asta is defeating the same monster when he comes across the Swordfish Priest who has defeated a large monster. The priest notices Asta and introduces himself as Kyoto. Kyoto also tells Asta of his dream of being a dancer that everyone wants to see, along with how they're not able to enter the kingdom, and he does this while giving Asta a dance performance that comes kind of out of left field. This show is wild. Kyoto then says if the priests win the game, then they're going to be allowed to enter the kingdom. Kyoto suddenly attacks Asta, who counters and reveals his dream of becoming the Magic Emperor. Kyoto gets excited and continues his clash with Asta. As their battle continues, Asta thinks about how it's hard to read Kyoto's moves. Kyoto says that he has the advantage with his Buto magic and continues to assault Asta. Asta tries to mimic Kyoto's magic, which he says isn't going to work. Kyoto attacks, but Asta manages to dodge by copying Kyoto's dancing style. Kyoto is shocked when Asta uses this chance to knock one of his swords away. After Veto and the Eye of the Magic Sun invade the temple, Yami Tsukihiro and the High Priest make an announcement and change the rules, so Kyoto and Asta postpone their fight. The two boys make their way towards Veto's location, and Kyoto senses the types and strengths of magic there. When Asta asks how Kyoto evaded his ki, the priest explains about his magic. The two boys are then surprised by the explosive clash of magic from Magna and Luck's combined spell. After blocking Veto from attacking Magna and Luck, Kyoto and Asta team up to attack Veto, after the terrorist threatens the lives of the temple's citizens. The boys unleash a flurry of attacks but are pushed back. Veto insults them, but the two attack again with renewed vigor. They land slashes to Veto's arms, but the man punches both of them, sending them crashing into a wall. Veto replies that Asta's weapon isn't worth anything and decides to take out all the trash before finishing Asta off. As he tries to attack the others, Vanessa arrives and saves them all and binds Veto with her magic. When Veto breaks free, he then fires a blast at Vanessa, only to have the attack warped back at him by Finral, who then says that he'll join in too. Veto tells them it doesn't matter how many there are, they won't put a scratch on him. Vanessa tells Noelle to protect the wounded and says that if they get hit by Veto, they're dead. Finral says they're all insane, and Vanessa says that she'll reward him, causing Finral to get excited. Vanessa uses her magic to bind Asta's hand to his sword and tells him that he'll have to be the one to attack since his attacks are the only ones that'll work. The fight begins when Asta charges at Veto, who counters by firing a blast. Finral warps the blast back at Veto, who diverts the attack and thinks about how his long-ranged attacks are negated or warped back at him. Veto also thinks about how good Finral is and that he'll have to destroy them at close range. Asta uses a portal to get behind Veto, who easily notices and goes to attack. Vanessa uses her magic to change Asta's direction, which shocks Veto. He looks up, but Asta's jumped through the portal to appear below him and lands a hit while saying that he's going to defeat him with his weapon. Asta then continues to jump through portals, and Veto says that they're all insects to be crushed and that he can easily follow Asta's movements, but notices that he actually can't anymore. Veto notices that the sword stuck in his body is weakening the magic that was strengthening his body, and that he's been relying on magic to fight this whole time. While pulling the sword out of his body, Veto comments about how it's impossible for him to lose to mere humans, and Asta tells him that everyone Veto has fought has not surrendered to him. Veto then yells out despair, and Asta attacks, saying that Veto loses. As the others celebrate, Veto gets back up and releases a large cloud of mana, planning on self-destructing and taking the entirety of the Seabed Temple with him. Yami then arrives, telling the others to let him handle the rest. Asta then watches as Yami turns to Veto and releases his mana while thinking about how he can still grow and that it's because of watching his men that he was able to surpass his limits. Veto once again yells out despair, and Yami tells him to shut up and that no matter how powerful Veto is, his spell is capable of cutting through dimensions. The attack cleanly slices through Veto and his mana, splitting them in half vertically. Yami then thanks Veto for taking good care of his men. As Veto dies, Yami tells Veto that he never fell into despair, and also tells Veto to go meet his maker. Asta, Noelle, Finral, and Vanessa rush over to Yami and congratulate him for defeating Veto, but Yami swings his sword at them while telling them to get away from him. The Black Bulls stand before the people of the Seabed Temple, and Asta thanks them for everything they did for him. The Black Bulls then leave using Finral's magic to their headquarters. After returning to base, Yami decides to go to the capital with Finral and Charmy to hand over the prisoners. Asta asks if he can come too, to which Yami says, yeah, if he wants. When they get to the capital, Asta says that he can never get over how big it is, and Yami tells him to shut up. Yami tells Finral that he can do whatever he wants, and Finral thanks Yami and leaves to look for some ladies. Yami, Charmy, and Asta then meet up with the Magic Emperor and reveal what they had found out about the enemy. Julius says that he'll have a group autopsy Veto's corpse and interrogate the prisoners. Yami then hands over the magic stone, and Julius compliments them for doing a good job. Julius reveals that they lost a few magic knights from the fight at Rockway, and compliments Yami for not losing a single member. Julius thinks about how Yami's gotten stronger, and how people question him when he put Yami as captain of a squad. Julius also thinks about what Yami told him, and tells Yami how he's become an amazing magic knight captain. Julius then compliments Asta for his achievements, and that he expects great things from him. Asta then asks for Julius's autograph, and Yami says that he'll give Asta his autograph, between his eyes. Mark suddenly contacts Julius with his magic and reveals that there's an invasion. Julius asks what happened, and Mark reveals that the Diamond Kingdom has attacked their border. Marx then uses his magic to show them the invasion, which shocks Julius. Julius says that this isn't the Diamond King's usual attack, and that the invasion is being led by 3 of the 8 Shining Generals. Said 3 Shining Generals, Lagos, Yagos, and Brox, express their excitement about the battle ahead. Marx then shows them that William Vengeance, along with Yuno and the other members of the Golden Dawn, have arrived in Khitan. William tells them that they're going to show the enemies the way out of the kingdom, while Asta is shocked by Yuno being there. At the Magic Knight headquarters, Julius and the others are watching the invasion. Julius decides to send in more people to help the situation. Yami volunteers because he wants to talk to William. Asta insists on helping too, but Yami says that Asta's too injured to go. Charmy, who wants to meet Yuno again, offers to keep Asta safe, so Yami allows them to come. When the Black Bulls arrive in Khitan, Charmy and Asta are amazed by the giant tree. Yami informs them that it's William's and then leaves them to find the captain, telling the 3 to go help the citizens. As Asta, Charmy, and Finral are helping the citizens escape the battle, they suddenly notice that Yuno is fighting Lagos above them. Yuno overpowers the general and defeats him with a large wind trident. After Lagos smashes into a building, Yuno drops down and greets Asta. Noting Asta's injuries and sweat, Yuno speculates that Asta's gotten stronger, but still not strong enough to beat him. Asta replies that Yuno has also gotten stronger, while Charmy admires Yuno. As Yuno and Asta continue to chalk, Sylph gets angry and demands to know who Asta is. The 2 boys explain, but Sylph misunderstands. Langris Vaude then arrives and harshly criticizes Finral. Asta asks who Langris is, and Finral reveals that Langris is his younger brother and the vice captain of the Golden Dawn. When Langris continues insulting Finral, Asta tells him to stop, but Finral interrupts and asks if that's all true. Langris says that the Black Bulls aren't needed since all the enemies have been defeated. However, when Langris calls Asta and Charmy children, Finral tells him not to insult the Black Bulls. Yagos then appears and attacks Langris, but the vice captain cuts through the mucus. The general has surrounded himself with the captured citizens and attempted to dissuade Langris from attacking him. Langris accepts that he'll have to kill the citizens to defeat Yagos. Asta refuses to let that happen since Magic Knights are supposed to protect the citizens. Asta, Charmy, and Finral decide to face Yagos. Charmy's sheep fluffy cushion launches Asta towards Yagos, and when Yagos tries to attack, Finral warps Asta above Yagos. Asta pulls out the Demon Dweller sword and dispels the snail, freeing the citizens. Shocked that his spell was negated, Yagos attacks again, but Finral warps Asta behind Yagos. The boy crashes into the general's back, knocking Yagos unconscious. Before Asta falls to the ground, Yuno grabs him with wind streams and comments about how messy his fighting style is. Finral then tells his brother that the Black Bulls will defeat the Golden Dawn. Yagos later lays bound in cotton, while Finral tells Asta and Charmy that since everything has been calmed down, they should go meet with Yami. Yuno and Asta bid each other goodbye, and Charmy tries to talk with Yuno, but instead gets into a fight with Sylph again. After the Black Bulls leave with Finral dragging Charmy, Finral asks Asta if he's okay with leaving things as is, to which Asta says that they'll meet again on another battlefield. Both Asta and Yuno say that they're aiming to be the Magic Emperor. Back at the castle, Yami is carrying Asta by the head, asking if Asta has a sickness that makes him fight all the time. Asta defends by stating that his body moved before he thought about what he was doing. Yami states that he wants a doctor to take a look at Asta. Yami takes Asta to Owen, the kingdom's greatest doctor, who once reattached Yami's arms when they were severed and who serves directly under the Magic Emperor. Owen says that he's heard about Asta from Yami when they went drinking together, while Asta thinks that because he serves under Julius Novachrono, he must be amazing. Yami leaves, saying that he has errands to run, but implies that he'll be out gambling instead. Owen remarks that though Yami is younger than he is, he always does things so boldly that it paints Owen in a bad light. He then tells Asta to sit so he can look at his arms. Using his magic, he examines Asta's broken arms. He compliments Asta's muscles, to which Asta replies that it's because he works out all the time. Owen remarks that his magic allows him to see inside body structures to the parts that need fixing, and that he'll be inputting the necessary mana to do the healing. However, he wears a grim expression as he examines Asta. He tells Asta that his arms are hit by an ancient curse spell, and that his arms can't be healed since there's no magic that can currently undo the damage that's been done in the kingdom. Later, Asta returns to base and joins in on the party that the Black Bulls are having. After eating and performing party tricks, Asta then says that he's tired and excuses himself from the room, which confuses everyone. After Finral secretly explains Asta's situation to the others, on his own outside, Asta sits on a large rock staring up at the moon. He reflects on Owen telling him that he can no longer wield a sword, and then on himself claiming that not giving up is his magic. He recalls various battles he's fought, and finally, he remembers Yuno's face. As he sits alone, shaking, the rest of the Black Bulls watch him worriedly from behind a tree and some rocks. Asta finally shouts that he will not give up. Everyone is astonished at Asta rants about making a lemon cake to go with the lemonade he's making with all the lemons life is throwing at him. He says that he'll find a way to get his arms healed or find a way to fight without them. Noelle is relieved in particular. The next day, Asta goes to greet everyone but notices that only Yami is there. Asta asks where everyone is, and Yami replies that he doesn't know. Asta wonders if they're all out having fun, but notices that someone's outside and heads to the window. He sees Noelle and Finral and wonders what they're up to. Noelle says that they've gotten everyone to their destinations, to which Finral replies that he doesn't know why they're not upfront about looking for a way to heal Asta. Noelle suggests that it's because Yami would get mad at them since it's not a mission, and Asta would tell them not to worry about him. Asta then leaves the building and starts to cry. He comments that he had always hated that he was born without magic, but in place he was blessed with wonderful teammates and friends. Back at base, Asta is exercising when a portal is created, and Finral and Noelle arrive, with Fonzel Kruger, Mariella, and Dominante Code appearing as well. They quickly take Asta and head out while telling Asta that they'll explain to him about where they're going later, arriving at the Witch's Forest. Outside the forest, Asta and the others arrive, at which time Domina tells them that the Witch Queen canvases the entire forest with her magic, and that they'll have to use cloaks that she invented to get in. After explaining everything to Asta, the group enters the Witch's Forest in two groups. Once inside, Noelle spots a golem, which Domina explains what the golem's purpose is and how they are protected by the cloaks. Suddenly, the men's cloak comes off and they're all swarmed by golems. They quickly race to the Queen's palace and make it to the palace with Finral's magic. Once inside, they find Vanessa unconscious on the floor with the Witch Queen standing over her. Asta yells at the Queen to leave Vanessa alone, but the Queen responds by saying it's her duty to discipline Vanessa for leaving and that it doesn't concern him. Asta says that he doesn't care and charges at the Queen. Finral creates a portal which Asta jumps through and appears behind the Queen, but the Queen easily defends herself. The Queen comments about how Asta doesn't have any mana, to which Asta responds that he may be a slum rat with no mana, but it's better than to be someone who walks out on their family. The Queen then comments about how Asta is the one that Vanessa was talking about, and how Vanessa could become her slave if she would heal Asta's arms. When two armies approach the forest, the Witch Queen displays them for the infiltrators to see. When Asta sees the Diamond Kingdom and the Eye of the Midnight Sun approaching, he sees both Mars and Fauna on each side. When the Witch Queen asks the infiltrators for assistance, Finral and the others agree to help defeat the two armies in exchange for the Witch Queen healing Asta's arms, which she then does. Asta is surprised that his arms are completely healed and even notes that they feel stronger than ever, with Asta starting to work out to prove his arms are better. The Black Bulls are ecstatic, but reprimand Asta when he immediately suggests going out to fight. The Queen tells him that she held up her end, so now it's their turn, to which Asta responds that he will hold up his end and he thanks her for healing his arms. Fonzel tells Asta that he's happy his arms are healed and that along with Domina and Mariella, they're going to face the Diamond Kingdom's army, which Asta says that's fine and, don't die. As members of the Eye of the Midnight Sun begin to capture witches in order to make them their slaves, Asta shows up and frees some of them. Asta asks one of the witches if they're okay, but the witch attacks Asta and flies away. Asta wonders what that was for, which Vanessa explains how the witches think that they're the greater sex. Noelle starts to put out the fires while Vanessa gets angry and says that she'll protect her home. The squad leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun manages to get a hold of some witches and expresses how he can't wait to have fun with them. Asta asks Vanessa if she can throw him towards the enemy, which Vanessa says that she can, but she won't be able to pull him back. Asta tells her he's fine with that, and Vanessa throws him towards the enemy. One of the members sends a spell towards Asta, but Asta easily cuts through the spell. Asta lands on the mage and slams his sword into him. Another member tells the others to kill Asta, but the boy jumps towards the other members and easily defeats them all, using them as stepping stones to get closer to their leader. The leader attacks, but Asta negates the spell and brings the Demon Slayer's sword down onto his head, knocking him unconscious. Asta tells the witches to escape as Fauna suddenly shows up and says that she's going to kill him. Salamander fires a fireball, which Asta reflects back at Fauna and Salamander. Before the fireball gets close enough, Salamander fires a second one that destroys the first one. Asta is sent falling from the shockwave, but Finral creates a portal that drops Asta into Vanessa's net. Fauna tells Asta that she's gonna kill him for getting in the way, to which Asta replies that he'll send them packing no matter how many times they come. Fauna and Salamander attack and manage to clear some of the forest, but Asta, Finral, and Vanessa manage to dodge the spell. Vanessa looks at the damage and thinks about how all the rumors are true about Salamander. Asta manages to catch Fauna and Salamander off guard and wounds Salamander. Vanessa sees this and thinks about how Asta's sword is the only thing that can defeat Salamander. Vanessa and Finral prepare to fight, but Asta puts his sword down and says that they should talk it out. Finral and Vanessa ask what Asta is thinking, but Asta ignores them and asks Fauna why she hates the kingdom so much. Fauna tells Asta to shut up and has Salamander fire a blast. Vanessa pulls Asta out of the way and throws him through a portal that Finral created, where he appears behind Fauna. Fauna notices Asta and prepares to counterattack, but Asta easily stops her and pins her. Asta asks why they can't come to understand each other, with Fauna stating that she would never believe him and increases Salamander's power by releasing her mana. Fauna says that she'll burn Asta to a crisp and charges at him, which Asta responds to by saying that he'll have to use his finishing move. As Fauna and Salamander get closer, Asta, Finral, and Vanessa are blown away from the heat coming from their bodies. Asta asks if they're okay, and Finral says that he can't create any more portals because of the overwhelming mana surge, while Vanessa says that her strings are getting burned almost immediately. Fauna and Salamander charge again, but Noelle shows up and blocks the charge with a barrier. Noelle tells them that the fires she puts out keep coming back, so they have to get rid of the source. Salamander easily destroys the barrier with a spell, but Vanessa, Noelle, Asta, and Finral manage to escape. After Noelle attacks Fauna with Sea Dragon's Roar, Fauna creates a large chunk of diamond to block the spell, but the spell breaks through it. Fauna and Salamander dodge the spell, but Noelle turns it and lands a hit on Salamander. Everyone cheers that the spell had hit, and Asta and Finral charge at Fauna. Finral says that now is the best time to attack, which Asta replies that he'll use his finisher. Fauna defends herself by firing a long-distance spell, but Asta easily counters it. Fauna uses a different spell to heal herself, and Asta recognizes both spells. Asta asks Fauna if she has any siblings, and Fauna responds that she doesn't and that her only family would be the other from her village. Fauna also says that she's gonna kill all of them with the weight of their sorrow, which Asta responds that he'll have to defeat her with his finisher before he can talk to her. Finral asks what this finisher he keeps alluding to is, and Asta explains it. Finral and Vanessa tell Asta he's not going to be able to use it without them. Vanessa then grabs Asta with her string and slingshots Asta towards Fauna with Finral's help. Fauna and Salamander try to dodge the attack, but Finral creates a portal that changes Asta's direction. Salamander fires a fireball at Asta, but Asta easily destroys it and blows right through Salamander with his finisher. After Fauna is surrounded, Asta tells her to surrender without resisting, and that her friends and family will be sad if she keeps up this nonsense, which infuriates Fauna, who tells him not to talk about her friends and family and releases her mana. Asta and Finral are surprised by how much power she still has left. Mars and Fanzel arrive at their location, and Fanzel thinks about how much power Salamander has while Mars notices its power. Ladros is chasing after Mars and Fanzel and tells them that running isn't going to help them. Fanzel calls out to Asta, who notices and asks why Mars is with him, and Fauna takes the chance to attack Asta. Fanzel remembers what Asta told him about his sword and tells Asta to hit the attack towards him. Asta does so, and Fanzel uses his magic to attack Ladros. As he's hit by the spell, Ladros realizes that it's too powerful as the attack blows him away. After hitting Ladros, Asta asks what just happened and why Mars was with Fanzel, only for their conversation to be interrupted by Salamander. Asta, Mars, and Fanzel prepare to take on Salamander when Mars notices that Fauna is within the flames. Mars then remembers what had happened to Fauna and what he had done in her name after getting his memory back. Mars charges at Fauna while yelling her name, but Asta holds him back. Fauna says that she doesn't know Mars and fires fireballs at him. Fauna says that she just wants everything to disappear and releases a large amount of mana. Finral and Vanessa notice that Fauna's going to blow up everything just like Veto tried to do. Fauna fires more fireballs, which Asta counters, but Mars ends up taking the hit. Fanzel tells Mars that he has to stop Fauna, but Mars replies that he doesn't have the sight to stop her since he's the one that killed Fauna in the first place. Asta hits Mars and tells him that this Fauna is someone else. Mars grabs Asta and says that he knows that this Fauna is his childhood friend, which Asta tells Mars to continue to live and to bring Fauna back to her senses. Mars agrees with Asta, and both say that they're not going to let her die. Asta and Mars charge at Fauna, and Fauna responds in the way that she's been responding to everything lately, which is to throw fireballs at them. Asta and Mars make it to Fauna, and Asta uses his sword to dispel the mana. Fauna says that her hatred will never disappear. Mars rushes in and hugs Fauna. Mars tells Fauna that it's him and asks for forgiveness for back then, to which Fauna remembers Mars and the village that was attacked. Mars tells Fauna that they have now met in the outside world and that they should go see it together. The mana dispels along with the third eye on Fauna's forehead, and Fauna says that it's a promise. Mars thanks Asta for his help, and Asta responds that it's great that Mars was able to save his friend. Fauna asks if Asta is Mars's friend and gets excited about Mars having a friend. Asta then asks Fauna about what happened to her, but Noelle, Finral, and Vanessa show up and attack him while yelling at him for being so reckless. Fanzel comes over and compliments Mars while also saying how glad he is that they're alive. Afterwards, they ask Fauna what happened to her, but she hardly remembers anything. Fauna reveals that she survived the final trial, but was thrown away for not meeting their expectation, and also says at that point she had her body taken over and was controlled. Asta asks about the third eye and pointed ears, and Fauna replies that she doesn't know anything about that. Mars is frustrated that Fauna went through that, but Fauna tells him that there's nothing to get anguished over since they were able to meet again. Vanessa asks why the Eye of the Midnight Sun came to the witch's forest in the first place, and Fauna says that they're after a magic stone. Imagine that. Noelle says that they'll have to go see the Witch Queen about the stone, but Fanzel tells them that they have to go help Dominante and Mariella with the wounded witches first. Fanzel thinks about going to check up on Ladros when he and Asta notice something. Fanzel says Ladros' magic power should have disappeared. Suddenly, lasers burst out of the forest. Fanzel tells everyone to run, but most of them are wounded. Ladros appears and comments about how he was able to absorb it all, even though it took a while. Fanzel says that there was nothing left of Ladros' power, and Ladros tells Fanzel that he fooled him by releasing all of his magic energy. Seeing that Mars protected Fauna with his body, Ladros asks why everyone protects others with their body and fires another laser at them, but Asta steps in and counters the blast. Ladros tells Asta that he has nothing to do with this and to get lost, but Asta replies that he has everything to do with this, since Mars is his friend. Fauna says that she can't cast her healing spell, which Asta tells her to sit tight while he flattens Ladros. Asta charges at Ladros, and Ladros tells him to stop, and also tells Asta that they should team up. Ladros also says that they should both rise up in the ranks of the Diamond Kingdom, which Ladros plans to double-cross. But Asta replies that he'll pass because he's going to become the Magic Emperor of the Clover Kingdom. Ladros then jumps onto a branch and uses it to fly in the air. Ladros fires blasts at Asta, but Asta easily counters the blasts. The two continue to trade blows, Ladros firing blasts and Asta reflecting them. But Ladros absorbs the reflected blasts and says that reflecting them back at him is useless. He also tells Asta to give up and, well, you know. Asta says that he'll never forgive him for hurting his friends. Ladros says that there's no such thing as friends because there are only those who use people and those that get used. He also says that he plans to use both Mars and Fauna to further his own position in life, and will also use Asta as a stepping stone. Asta throws his sword into Ladros, and Ladros starts to lose his mana. He notices that he can't pull the sword out, and he falls to the ground. He starts to panic about how everything is falling apart, and he tells Asta to stay away from him. Asta tells him that he didn't get where he is on his own, and also says that his friends are there to help each other rise. Asta then tries to knock him out, but he quickly escapes and uses reinforcement magic to pull the sword out. Ladros quickly grabs Fauna and tells her to bring out her powerful magic. Fauna says that he doesn't know what he's talking about, so Ladros then attacks Mars and threatens to kill him. Fauna tells him to stop, and then Salamander appears and attacks Ladros. Ladros absorbs Salamander and comments about how his mana is very high quality. Asta charges at him, but Ladros easily pierces Asta's shoulder from a distance. Ladros comments about how he'll be able to make the kingdom his with power, when Asta suddenly stands back up. He fires a blast at Asta, and he decides to continue firing blasts at afar until Asta's body is blasted to pieces. After the Witch Queen decides to intervene with her magic, Asta looks back up, while a black mass surrounds Asta's arm and withers the grass around him. Asta stands back up, with the black mass having surrounded his arm and created a horn along with a wing. Ladros wonders about this feeling he's having and tells Asta to get out of sight while firing blasts. Asta changes direction and heads towards Ladros. He then attacks Ladros and defeats him with a new attack. Ladros is lying on the ground in a withered state and thinks about how all the magic power within his body has disappeared. Asta walks over. Ladros tells Asta to just kill him. However, Asta tells him that he's not going to kill him, because Ladros is going to help them with the injuries and he's going to apologize for everything that he's done. Ladros starts to laugh and says that he really can't win against Asta. Asta asks what's wrong with him. He replies that his head's been cleared up since the magic stone on his head was destroyed. Ladros then thinks that since there's someone like Asta who's climbing to the top, maybe he'll be able to rise to the top with him. Suddenly, the Witch Queen arrives on the battlefield and compliments Asta on being able to defeat both armies. Asta then asks if the Queen can heal the others, to which the Queen replies that it won't be necessary and restrains the others with scaffold of fresh blood. Asta asks what she's doing, but the Queen uses puppet blood flow to take control of his body and then heals his wounds. Vanessa realizes that the Queen wanted the anti-magic weapons all along, while the Queen orders Asta to kill the others. As Asta fights off the Queen's control over his body, Vanessa pleads with the Queen to let everyone go. When she refuses and orders Asta to kill Noelle, Vanessa's magic surges and a new spell appears in her grimoire, and a red cat made of thread sits on Vanessa's head. After unleashing the cat's power, Vanessa frees Asta and the others, defeating the Witch Queen. After the Queen admits defeat, she heals everyone, and she also hands over her earring, which is in actuality a magic stone, which Asta thanks her for. He then asks the Queen why the Eye of the Midnight Sun even wants the stones, with her explaining the story of the elves and how the group are probably descendants of the elves looking to take vengeance. She also explains how Asta's grimoire and swords originally belonged to the leader of the elves. Hearing all of this new information causes Asta to faint from information overload, which is something I'm going to do as well, considering we're only halfway through this video. Later outside the forest, Asta and the others see Mars and his group off, with Mars telling Asta that he'll come to his aid since they're friends now, and Asta agrees and says that he'll come help Mars if he's ever in trouble. Later, Noelle, Asta, Vanessa, and Finral arrive back at headquarters. Asta tells Yami that his arms are healed, but Yami reacts calmly. Asta then reveals that they found another magic stone, which surprises Yami. He then orders Asta to go buy some booze, and Asta says that he'll do that, while Yami also welcomes Vanessa back, and she replies happily that she's home. Days later, Yami orders Asta to take a break since Asta's been working too much, and Asta questions what he'll do without missions. Yami then tells Asta and Noelle that there's a festival coming up. Finral reminds them that the squads compete over how many stars they obtain, and that the event decides which squad comes in first place for the year. Finral also says that this is the biggest annual festival that takes place within the kingdom, the Star Awards Festival. Before Finral can leave, Asta asks him for a favor. Once the Black Bulls arrive at the festival, Noelle and Asta are amazed by the sights, while Yami, Vanessa, and Charmy rush off to enjoy the festival. Asta and Noelle meet up with Kahano and Kyoto, who are brought by Finral. Kyoto and Kahano are amazed at the festival and thanks Asta for inviting them. Asta asks if Kyoto brought his leg, to which Kyoto says that he has, and even reveals that it had been preserved with water magic. Asta then opens a bottle containing the Witch Queen's magic, which heals Kahano's throat and Kyoto's leg. The two are overjoyed and hug both Asta and Noelle. Kahano sings, which attracts the attention of the other festival goers. Kahano comments about how they should have fun and live this day to the fullest since the festival only happens once a year. She then suggests that they should have a double date, much to Noelle, Asta, and Finral's shock. Asta, Noelle, and Kyoto each think about what Kahano has planned for this double date. In reality, Kahano's just thinking about how this is a good chance to steal Asta from Noelle. The group then heads off to enjoy the festival, and Noelle notices that Asta and Kahano make a good match. Suddenly, Kahano asks Asta what Noelle means to him, when they notice a crying girl before Asta can answer her. While everyone insults the crying girl for being a peasant, Noelle walks over and asks why she's crying, as if everyone insulting her for being a peasant isn't a good enough reason to be crying. When the girl doesn't stop crying, everyone puts on a show for the girl, which succeeds in making her stop crying. The girl then reveals her name is Emma and explains what had happened, and Kahano uses her magic to spread the girl's name around. Emma's mom shows up and thanks them for helping her little girl, while also noticing that Noelle is a member of the royal family. The mother apologizes for what has happened, but Noelle just gives a speech about how even though she is a member of the royal family, she'll still extend her hand to anyone who's in need, and that everyone has a right to enjoy the festival. Asta suddenly remembers Kahano's question and says that he likes Noelle, which causes Noelle to blast Asta away. Kahano then comments about the two and decides to enjoy the festival with Noelle alone. Elsewhere, Asta wonders what's wrong with Noelle for doing that when he overhears some people talking about a beautiful woman. Suddenly, a nobleman approaches the woman for her to accompany him for the night, but gets angry when she ignores him. Before Asta can intervene, the woman defeats him and his men. Asta recognizes the magic and realizes that the woman is the captain of the Blue Rose, Charlotte Roselay. Charlotte starts to torture the man and his men for trying to use her as an accessory, and Sol expresses how excited she is for witnessing her power. Asta tries to stop Charlotte before she kills the man, but runs into Sol, who remembers him. After getting into an argument with Asta, Sol tosses him away and forces Charlotte to wear the dress that she had brought. As everyone expresses at how amazing Charlotte looks, Sol and Charlotte get angry at the man. After watching the events between Yami and Charlotte play out, Asta notices that people are heading to the Great Hall for the ceremony. As the ceremony begins, Julius appears before the people and thanks them for gathering today. He informs the crowd that he'll be presenting the award today and that the king will be taking the stage after him. the royal king, not the magic emperor or the wizard king, like the king. Julius then explains that he's presenting the awards because of their aggression with the Diamond and Spade kingdoms and their battle with the terrorist group of the Eye of the Midnight Sun. I just realized all of the kingdoms were named after card suits. Wow. Julius then explains that he's presenting the awards because of their aggression with the Diamond and Spade kingdoms and their battle with the terrorist group, the Eye of the Midnight Sun, and how the people of the kingdom have become victims because of this. Julius also explains how they hold this ceremony to award those who have protected this kingdom. Julius then asks the crowd to cheer for the Magic Knight captains as they all come out. The crowd takes notice of the new captains of the Crimson Lion and Purple Orca, and also the absence of Yami and Charlotte. As Julius prepares to announce the rankings, the Black Bulls remain indifferent in comparison to the crowd's excitement. Julius announces that the Golden Dawn has taken first place with 125 stars, to no one's surprise. Julius then calls Yuno, who comes up on stage with Sylph, as the one who received the most stars within the Golden Dawn, which surprises Asta. As Julius prepares to announce who will be coming in second place, the crowd wonders, will it be the Silver Eagles, the Crimson Lions, or the Blue Rose? Julius announces that the Black Bulls have come in second place with 101 stars, which shocks everyone, including the Black Bulls themselves. As the crowd wonders if the Black Bulls have cheated, Rebecca Scarlet and a little girl that Asta protected vouches for them. Julius announces that the Black Bulls have legally obtained all their stars within a short amount of time and asks any members of the Black Bulls to appear on stage. As all the members of the Black Bulls decide to let Asta take the stage for them, Yami throws Asta onto the stage. As Asta reaches the stage, Asta and Yuno greet each other and suddenly start an argument over who will get the most stars next year. Julius tells the crowd that Asta and Yuno are the strongest rookies from the newcomers of this year. As the crowd is amazed about the two, Seke Bronzatza announces that both Asta and Yuno are peasants from the Forsaken Realm of the kingdom. As the crowd wonders if both Asta and Yuno really achieved their stars, Yuno suddenly releases his mana. Yuno launches a wind magic spell at Asta, which Asta easily counters with his Demon Slayer sword. Asta comically asks what Yuno is doing all of a sudden, since that could have killed him, and Yuno simply replies that if he had killed Asta, then Asta wouldn't have been worth that much. As the crowd is amazed by Asta and Yuno's power on display, a shocked Seke thinks about how they're on a totally different level. After the demonstration, Julius announces that both Asta and Yuno have worked the hardest to get to where they are, and that they should overcome their difference in rank and lead their country to victory. The crowd agrees with Julius and cheers Asta and Yuno, as they look on towards the crowd cheering and think about how far that they've come. After the results for all the other squads are revealed, an upset Rill, whose squad came in last, complains relentlessly to Asta, with Yuno looking onwards, wondering how someone like Rill is even a captain. Yuno and Asta are both left speechless but unimpressed when Augustus Kira Clover XIII takes the stage. The king announces the Royal Knights selection exam, but Asta questions why the king is the one choosing the knights. Yuno and Asta openly discuss the king and his lack of achievements, so Augustus orders their execution. Julius steps in and talks the king down. Afterwards, Julius talks alone with Yuno and Asta and warns them not to be arrogant in the coming exams. As the boys make their way down the tower stairs, they witness Marileona Vermilion berate the Crimson Lion squad. They overhear Marileona mention training in a hot spring, which Yuno considers easy while Asta considers it fun. Overhearing them, Marileona grabs both of their heads and forces them to join the training. She carries them to the Yule Team Volcano Mountain Trail after also picking up Yami and Charlotte and Noelle, with Sol shortly following them to the training grounds. Leopold welcomes Asta and Yuno to train with him and challenges Yuno, declaring that they're now rivals because they're both Asta's rivals, but Yuno does not care. Marileona forces everyone onto the path, and most struggle to withstand the heat. Suddenly, both Yami and Charlotte rush past everyone and easily head up the trail. As everyone's amazed by the captains, Leopold figures out that the captains are using mana skins to avoid the intense heat of the Grand Magic Zone. Leopold, along with the Crimson Lion squad, get motivated by this and says that they can head up the trail since they can use mana skin too. Yuno uses mana skin to head up the trail, Leopold sees him and follows him. Sol begins to head up the trail with the desire to enter the hot spring with her captain Charlotte. As everyone's moved on, Asta's left behind while still trying to continue up the trail when he drops to his knees. Marileona suddenly shows up and tells Asta to go home, since there's only so much he can do without any mana. Marileona continues to say that there's more than one way for Asta to reach the goal, but Asta gets back up and says that he's not going anywhere since his dream is built on what he accomplished. Asta then realizes that he has no idea how he can head up the trail, but suddenly remembers the form that he took during his fight with Ladros. Asta tries to transform into that form, but it only angers Marileona, who decides to just leave Asta. Asta recalls back to that time and decides to jump into the magma to activate it, but realizes that that's a little too reckless. Asta remembers what Marileona told him and starts to think about what he is capable of. Asta realizes that he can sense ki and begins to sense the ki within himself. As Asta starts to let the anti-magic into his body, he suddenly transforms into that form. Once he's entered that state, he suddenly starts to rocket to the top. Up the mountain, Leopold, Noel, and the rest of the Crimson Lion squad run into a magical life form. As Leopold and Noel start to argue on who should take the magical life form, Asta suddenly appears and murks the life form before heading up the trail. As Asta manages to catch up to Yuno, both of them manage to reach the top of the volcano, and Asta starts to head into the magma. Mereoleona releases her mana, which causes Asta to head in her direction. As Asta tells Mereoleona to run away, she responds saying that she's not going to run and hits Asta into the ground. As Mereoleona compliments Asta while also saying that it's not enough, Asta agrees and thinks about how he still has to train to control that form. Mereoleona says that Asta may enter the hot spring and to strip, which shocks Asta. After reaching the hot springs, Asta and the others realize that there are women with them, which prompts Sol to use her earth magic to create a divider between the springs to separate the men and the women. On the men's side, Leopold is challenging Yuno again, and Asta decides to join in. Yami, ever the amazing role model, tells them that what they're doing is lame and that they should try to peek on the women's side. As the Crimson Lion men wonder if they should peek, Yami tells them that since they're born men, they should peek. These are Yami's opinions, and not the opinions of the Amagi. As Yami asks Yuno to join in, Yuno refuses, and Yami gets angry, but Asta comes to his rescue. Leopold comments about how his brother wouldn't peek, and Yami responds that they shouldn't be like Fuegoleon and that they should surpass him. Leopold and the Crimson Lion men all agree and decide that they're going to peek. Yami then asks Asta if he's going to join in, but Asta says that he's not going to since his heart already belongs to another, which shocks everyone. Days later, as the Royal Knights selection exam begins, Julius and the king begin to explain the rules, and then begin to reveal the teams. Asta's teamed up with Mimosa, along with a purple orca member named Xerx Lugner. As they wonder who Xerx is, a mage rudely shows up late to the event, announcing himself as Xerx Lugner, who looks rather different than how people remember him, which makes sense considering this is Zora assuming Xerx's identity. Xerx, with quotation marks, introduces himself to Asta and plants a stink bug in his hand. Asta asks if he has any intention of getting along, and Xerx replies with insults and reveals that he just came to mock the other Magic Knights. As Asta complains that he can't work with this kind of guy, Julius states that all of the other teams have been confirmed. As the Magic Emperor and Marx Francois show all of the participants the tournament brackets, Asta notices where he and Yuno are placed and how he and Yuno will not meet until the finals. Asta also plans to win the whole tournament when Julius announces that they're going to start the first round of the tournament. Julius also comments on how the participants can attack however they want since they have high-class healers on standby, but they can't kill their opponents. After reaching the tournament stage, Asta and Mimosa finds out that their team is up first. As the battle begins, Mimosa tries to calm Asta and Xerx, who are bickering, and lists off her and Asta's abilities so they can form a plan. Suddenly, their crystal is struck by the opponent's mages and cracks. Moving quickly, Mimosa grabs the crystal with vines and attempts to move it to safety, but is struck again, surprising her with how accurate the attack is at long range. After the crystal is struck again, Mimosa smiles nervously at Xerx, who appears to have fallen asleep, and Asta angrily decides to win without him. When Xerx refuses to help, Asta and Mimosa make a plan without him. Mimosa uses her magic to make a map of Team B's location, and then she and Asta charge directly for their opponent's crystal. While they run, she guards the crystal and he blocks attacks. After closing most of the distance, they hide behind a wall, and Mimosa fires Magic Cannon Flower, which is blocked by Curtis Warren's Rock Fortress. Mimosa switches back to sensing when their opponents dash out from behind the wall, both seemingly carrying their crystal. Mimosa warns Asta about how much magic Curtis is concentrating, and then notices that the others have surrounded her and Asta and are concentrating magic as well. Suddenly, Asta steps on a paralytic trap, leaving Mimosa alone to defend against the 3 large attacks. Suddenly, a counter trap appears around Mimosa and Asta and absorbs and reflects the 3 spells back at the casters, who are knocked out. As she heals Asta, Mimosa questions on what happened and notices Xerx walking past. When the rogue threatens Curtis, she recognizes the ash magic and recognizes that Xerx set the traps. After Xerx destroys the crystal and Team B wins the match, Mimosa finishes healing Asta, who confronts their troublesome teammate. She questions when Xerx had the time to set up such large traps, but he refuses to answer. Team A are then escorted out of the field. Magna tells Team B to leave the field, with Sol asking who made him all high and mighty. As Magna begins arguing with her, Asta asks them who their teammate is. He complains to the team about their performance not being beautiful while introducing himself. As Asta questions this introduction, Mimosa, who's embarrassed, introduces him to her older brother, Kirsch Vermilion. As Mimosa and Kirsch talk, Kirsch notices Asta, who greets him. Kirsch's face turns dull and he tells Asta to not speak with him so casually, which shocks him. Kirsch explains why Asta is not beautiful and how his training is for the weak, which Asta counters by saying that he was weak and that he made his muscle his weapon. Kirsch also explains how Asta's fate was already decided for him, and Mimosa tells her older brother to win his next match so that she and Asta can defeat him. After winning the second match, Kirsch asks the other Magic Knights how beautiful his fight was, but insults Asta when the boy compliments him. Kirsch then says that in their next match, he will crush Asta like the cracked bowl that he is. Asta counters that a cracked bowl lasts longer, but Kirsch points out that only a poor person would continue to use a cracked bowl. Asta then watches the remaining matches, including Yuno and Noelle's, and is happy when they win. Before the fifth match, Asta questions who would be named Cross, but Mimosa explains that it's X, and it's probably for anonymity. Asta's creeped out and surprised when a weird Magic Knight starts laughing and reveals himself to be Rill. His butler, Walter, also appears to Asta's shock, and when Asta and Rill greet each other, Walter offers the boy some tea. As he sips some tea, Asta realizes that the taste is too high class for him. Walter then thanks him for being a friend to Rill. Afterwards, Asta congratulates Yuno and Noelle as they return to the platform. Julius then calls for the battlefield to be rearranged for the second round, and Asta notices Zerx twitch at this. You know what, I'm just gonna start calling him Zora because he is Zora and not actually Zerx. So from now on, this guy I'm gonna be calling him Zora because that's his name. Before the next match, Asta asks Zora if he was bothered by his traps getting moved, and after the rogue reveals that he placed them the night before, Asta demands to know where they're located. Zora refuses to tell, so Asta decides to deal with them himself. At the start of the match, Kirsch covers the battlefield with magic cherry blossom blizzard, so Asta unleashes Black Hurricane, which nullifies all of the cherry blossoms and traps, aggravating both Kirsch and Zora. Asta declares to Zora that he wants to fight as a team. Once the group formulates a plan, they split up with Mimosa and head towards Team C's crystal. Kirsch manages to locate Asta and attacks him with his dance of 100 million cherry blossoms, which Asta deflects while retreating soon after. He runs towards an opening within a nearby cliff where he taunts Kirsch into following him. Kirsch senses the trap set up by Zora and utilizes his cherry blossom clones in order to set them off. As Kirsch rushes towards Asta to finish them, he falls into a pit set up by Team B, where Asta jumps into the pit to flatten and knock out Kirsch. Zora starts to set a trap on top of the hole until Asta hears a familiar sound behind him. He turns to see Magna racing towards them. Magna says he won't get close to give Asta the advantage of fighting as their distance guarantees him a win. He throws a fireball, which Asta notes that he can hit easily. Asta is shocked when the fireball disappears though and hits the crystal. Magna explains that it's due to his new spell, Extreme Killing Vanishing Fireball. At that moment, Zora tells Asta to stall for 5 minutes as he prepares a trap. Asta continues to try to hit Magna's fireballs, but to no avail. After some time, he manages to hit one, which shocks Magna. He tells him to keep throwing fireballs, which excites them both. As they continue fighting, Kirsch surprises Asta with his quick recovery. Zora finishes his trap and tells Asta to go fight Kirsch. Angry from Asta knocking him out earlier, Kirsch declares that he'll defeat him by using his full power. However, before he could attack, one of Zora's traps activates. This allows Asta to knock him unconscious once again. Soul appears, preparing to destroy Team B's crystal. Before she can destroy it though, Mimosa's spell activates and takes control of the golem. Asta takes the opportunity to destroy the other team's crystal, therefore winning the match. Afterwards, Zora calls out the improvements that Team C needs in an insulting way, and Asta tells him that he's being a jerk. They clear the battlefield and watch Finral's match against Langris. When Langris prepares to launch an attack, Asta senses that he's felt this feeling before. He and the other participants are amazed by the fight. Asta calls out to Finral as he lies on the ground unconscious. Despite the match being over, Langris prepares a spell to kill Finral. At that moment, Asta, Luck, and Magnus surround Langris. Asta tells him that the match is over and that there's something wrong with him. He tells him how Finral said Langris was actually kind, but Asta says Finral is nicer than anyone and is a true Magic Knight. He says Langris is not a Magic Knight, which angers him, obviously. Langris asks the Magic Emperor if he could fight Asta before the next match. Instead of waiting for an answer, he proceeds to just launch an attack at Asta anyway. However, Asta quickly destroys it with his Demon Slayer sword. The Magic Emperor uses his time magic to stop the two Magic Knights from fighting any further. He tells them that he'll allow the fight as long as they follow the exam rules. When Asta's released, he apologizes to Mimosa and Zora for moving up their fight. He explains how he wants to beat Langris, and they agree to help. Asta is defending their crystal from Langris' spells, but he ends up getting hit in the leg. Mimosa heals him, and he continues to fight. He thinks about his time with Finral and declares that he'll win. As he deflects Langris' spells, he orders Zora to attack. Langris' spells avoid the first trap, but Zora reveals the trap placed on his body. The trap reflects the spatial magic back towards Langris, but to no avail. Just as Langris launches another attack at Zora, Asta reveals his black form and easily negates the magic. Langris asks what is that form, but Asta tells him that it's nothing special. He explains how he idolized people like Langris and wanted to protect people along with them. This infuriates Langris even further, and he prepares to attack him once again. Asta uses Black Meteorite to launch himself at Langris and Team G's crystal, destroying it. However, Team B's crystal breaks at the same time, which makes their match a draw. Asta passes out from exhaustion and is taken into recovery. While he's recovering, he's distraught over not fighting Yuno in the final round. A few days later, he's at the hideout in a daze. His teammates try to cheer him up with no success. Suddenly, Mereoleona bursts into the hideout and punches him in the face. After giving Yami alcohol as a thank you, she grabs Asta, Noelle, and Luck as they pass the exam. At the gathering of the Royal Knights, Asta is shocked to find out Zora's identity and position in the Black Bulls. They're all chatting until Mereoleona interrupts them to tell them to go change into their Royal Knight robes. Mereoleona explains where the Eye of the Midnight Sun base is located, and they depart. Outside of the Gravito Stones, Asta is placed on a team with Mereoleona and Zora. She tells everybody that the plan is to fight any way they like and to head to the center of the palace. They head inside to start their attack. After Mereoleona single-handedly defeats 3 Eye of the Midnight Sun members, they notice that there are 2 Astas. Mereoleona uses her flame magic to burn them both, which reveals that the clone is Raya. Asta and Zora stand by and watch as Mereoleona fights with Raya. Asta is amazed by the fight happening right before his eyes. When Raya is about to use his self-destruct spell, Asta quickly uses the Demon Slayer sword to stop him. He punches Raya and tells him not to treat his life like garbage. He demands for Raya to tell his side of the story, but Mereoleona tells him that those people are not interested in mutual understanding. He asks why, as they're the same as the elves. He goes on about wanting to build a country where everybody is equal. This touches Raya, but he deems it a little too late. As the elves' reincarnation begins, Asta's confused on why Raya is glowing. Raya gets up and attacks with light and dark magic. Asta's surprised that he's using 2 different types of magic at the same time. Mereoleona counters by using a spell to destroy both spells. Mereoleona comments about how the enemy's feelings are set in stone and that they only want to kill them. Asta replies that he'll win and create a path where they can understand one another. As they're fighting Raya, an elf-possessed Rill bursts into the room with a 4-headed lindworm. Asta asks why Rill is being friendly with Raya, but the elf introduces himself as Lyra. Still confused, Asta tries to explain how they're friends, but Lyra claims to have no human friends. He proceeds to attack them with the 4-headed lindworm. Zora tells Asta that Rill is possessed, so he needs to use his anti-magic to stop them. Raya says it won't reach them just as Zora activates his trap. This allows Asta to lunge at them with his sword, hitting Lyra in the process. He's shocked when Rill doesn't turn back. Raya explains how it's a result of the reincarnation spell. At that moment, 3 other elves show up. Zora tells Asta to fall back as they need to come up with a plan. The 5 elves proceed to attack them, but Mereoleona blocks it. She pushes them both out as she plans to take on all 5 by herself. Using Zora's spell, he absorbs the elf's magic and bounces it to Asta. Asta uses his sword to bounce it back to Zora. They do this again until Zora's circle begins to break. Asta gets behind the circle and hits the spell towards the elves. As that happens, they grab Mereoleona and escape. As they're escaping, Raya grabs Asta's leg, intending to stop him. Asta hands Mereoleona to Zora and proclaims that he'll make it back alive. He's taken to Licht's chamber, where he tries to free Mimosa. He notices that Yuno is possessed and tries to talk to him, but gets attacked by the elf inhabiting Klaus. As he's being attacked, he proclaims that he won't die and he will become the Magic Emperor. Those words cause Yuno to come back to his senses and come to Asta's defense. Asta asks Yuno if it's really him, and Yuno replies that it is, which makes Asta happy. Yuno tells Asta to rest as he'll fight the elves in front of him. Asta laughs and says that he'll fight alongside him. Using Black Asta and Spirit Dive, they both defeat the 2 elves. Seeing the elves defeated gathers Licht's attention. Asta quickly notices how he's the leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun. At that moment, Nero pops out of his shirt and pecks him, which confuses Asta. After placing the defeated elves on the ground, Licht pulls a sword from the floor and walks towards Asta and Yuno, with the 2 of them preparing to fight back. As Asta draws his Demon Dweller sword, Licht closes the distance between them in an instant, catching them both off guard. He then swipes the sword from Asta and uses it to repel the boys, crashing into a wall. Asta's heavily injured by the attack and loses his black form in the process. He thinks about how powerful Licht is and that his body is unable to move anymore. Still able to fight, Yuno proceeds to fight back against Licht alone, with the elf on the verge of victory. However, before Licht can release his final attack, Asta regains the use of his black form and charges into the air, surprising the elf and striking him together alongside Yuno. Licht then releases a magical blast from the Demon Dweller sword, which sends Asta and Yuno crashing out of the air all the way through to the bottom of the dungeon and down to the ground below, with Yuno using his magic to protect them and Mimosa as they're all sent crashing into the water below them. After surviving Licht's attack, Asta, Yuno, and Mimosa are met by the other surviving members of the Royal Knights and later regroup with them outside of the dungeon. While being healed by magic items given to them by Nozel, Asta and the others are informed about the elves attacking the kingdom, with Nozel stating that the kingdom needs to be saved even if it means killing the possessed magic knights. After Noel suggests saving them instead of killing them, Asta and the others agree, with Nozel accepting the decision and creating a vessel for everyone to travel back to the kingdom. As they pass over the Forsaken Realm, Asta and Yuno notice that many villages in the area are being attacked by elves, including Hage. Despite asking to stop to defend Hage, Nozel refuses, stating that the capital takes priority. However, he does allow Asta and Yuno to go alone, telling them to catch up with them later in the capital. After departing, Asta and Yuno manage to arrive in time to stop the elf from killing Nash, Sister Lily, and the rest of their foster family. After complimenting Nash for his bravery, the two step up to fight against the elf, holding back many of their attacks. After hearing that Father Orsi was poisoned, Asta leaves the elf to Yuno and goes to the father's side to help. Asta tries to dispel the poison with his Demon Slayer sword, but he's unable to remove it. After failing with the sword, Asta notices the sword that he grabbed from Licht appearing from his grimoire and tries using that, which ends up removing the poison from the father's body. As the anti-magic flows out of the sword and absorbs the poison in all the citizens, Asta gets an idea and returns to Yuno's side to fight the elf. After having a path opened for him by Yuno, Asta jabs the elf with the new sword, which dispels the reincarnation magic and exorcises the elf's spirit. After realizing that the sword could be used to save everyone possessed by the elves, Asta happily shows it off to Yuno, who then states that he was the one who did most of the work in defeating the elf. After being thanked by everyone in the village, Asta and Yuno leave with the formerly possessed magic knight now heading straight for the capital to help save the kingdom. After traveling for a while, Yuno tells the others that they're going to reach the Common Realm soon. Yuno also says that he can sense elf magic coming from two directions, which leads to Asta suggesting that they split up. Asta also suggests that Yuno take the Purple Orca member since he has his sword. Yuno agrees with Asta while also commenting that they can use the poison plant magic to stop the elf from moving. Both Asta and Yuno then agree to meet up at the capital. As Asta makes his way towards the town, he notices a bolt of lightning from the sky. After reaching the town that was being attacked by the elf, Asta shows up in time to see that the magic knight who was attacking the town was Luck, and that he was possessed by the spirit of Rufel. And yeah, I know it's not Rufel in the Japanese, but I've been kinda using English dub names mostly, so I'm gonna go with Rufel. Asta also sees that the ones fighting him off are Magna and Vanessa. As Rufel prepares to kill Magna, Asta shows up and saves him. Vanessa figured that Rouge used the last of its power to bring Asta there. Asta prepares to fight Rufel while also proclaiming that they're Luck's friends. Rufel tells Asta that they're starting to anger him and also comments about how someone like Asta, who has no mana, actually existing, and that someone like him fight against him to be amusing. Asta replies that the Black Bulls have already acknowledged him and that he won't let any of them be lost. As Asta joins the battle, Rufel is shocked by Asta's ability to follow and counter his movements, and begins to change tactics. As Asta begins losing ground in the battle, he asks Magna and Vanessa for help to deal with Rufel's attacks. Knowing that his body won't hold out much longer, Asta prepares to finish him off for his next attack. As Asta charges at Rufel, Magna creates a smokescreen to block Rufel's sight. Rufel counters by expanding his mana and finding out where his mana is being dispelled. As Rufel finds out where Asta is, he prepares to finish him off. Vanessa uses her thread to pull back Asta, while Magna uses a fireball to cut Vanessa's thread. Rufel figures out that they use the thread in order to adjust the timing of Asta's attack. Asta then lands a hit on Rufel. Asta mounts Rufel and goes to stab him with his sword, but Rufel releases his mana to block him. As Rufel goes to kill Asta, Magna and Vanessa quickly grab and hold Rufel down. Rufel decides to release all of his mana in order to kill the three when they notice that Rufel will become something else entirely. As Rufel proclaims that he'll never forgive the humans for taking what's so precious to him, Asta replies to him that he doesn't know what happened to Rufel but still apologizes. Asta also says that Luck is their precious comrade and to please not take him away from them. Luck hears Asta's words and rushes to wake himself up. As the spell is being undone, Rufel remembers what Licht's friend once said and comments about how he wishes to have gotten to know them. As Luck wakes up, he comments about how he's the Black Bull's comrade while having tears run down his face. Asta watches as Magna hugs Luck and replies that they're his comrades. After breaking the spell on Luck, the group decides to stop at their base on the way to the capital, finding their base in ruins. After finding Gordon, Gray, and Henry at the base, Asta had to be the one to help them explain what happened to the base, as well as be the one to introduce Henry to the others. After finding out that Gauche was also possessed by an elf, Charmy also returns, upset about her ruined meal. After Charmy feeds everyone with food that restores her magic power, Henry reconstructs the base and they all head off to Hikairo, where Luck senses 3 more elves in town. After the Black Bulls work together to fight the elves, Asta and the others begin to celebrate their victory until they're interrupted by the arrival of Rades, Sally, and Valtos. Rades offers to transport them to the capital in exchange for help with killing their former leader. Asta immediately refuses to work with him for revenge and wants him to atone instead. After relentless arguing with one another, Asta finally manages to convince him, as well as Sally and Valtos, to help him save the country. with all three accepting Charmy's food and Valtos transporting the base right to the capital. After the Apostles of Sephira arrive to summon the Shadow Palace, the base is warped into Clover Castle's courtyard, and everyone then begins to fight off several elves in the area. When the group of elves is defeated, the Coral Peacock's captain, Dorothy Unsworth, arrives, possessed by the elf Rave, who pulls part of the base into her glamour world. Meanwhile, Patoli, alongside Gauche, who is possessed by the elf Drawa, combines their magic to destroy the rest of the base, with Gordon and Gray cushioning everyone's fall. After Radis and Valtos decide to leave, Drawa tells Patoli to head to the Shadow Palace while he deals with the humans, with Henry telling the others to get away from him. Just then, Noelle and Zora arrive, much to everyone's surprise, and after which Yami and Jack also arrive, seeing Patoli headed to the Shadow Palace and deciding to follow him there. Before he leaves, Yami tells him that they can handle things from there and tells them to surpass their limits, to which everyone agrees, as if Asta hasn't been surpassing his limits for the last 30 episodes already. After Yami's departure, the Black Bulls proceed to battle Drawa. With help from his sister, Drawa creates multiple mirrors and uses them to reflect his sister's magic, paralyzing everyone. Asta then manages to use his new sword to free himself, along with Henry, Gray, and Gordon. After noticing that Asta's wielding the Demon Destroyer sword, Drawa becomes angry and attacks Asta, stating that his sword does not belong to him. With Gray and Gordon as backup, Asta manages to slowly turn the tide back in their favor. Asta then goes into detail about knowing all of Gauche's spells and that he knows him well enough to deal with them, even if he's possessed. Asta, Gordon, Henry, and Gray then begin to explain what kind of person Gauche is, and that they'll get him back. Suddenly, Asta is sent flying towards Drawa and his sister. Drawa thinks about what the Demon Destroyer sword is capable of and reflects his sister's image on the mirrors surrounding Asta. Asta closes his eyes to avoid looking at her, and Drawa fires a spell at him. Asta manages to counter the spell using his instincts. After that, Drawa fires multiple attacks at Asta, which are all blocked thanks to help from Gray, Gordon, and Henry. As Drawa's spell manages to destroy the shield, Asta enters his black form and destroys the spell. Asta then destroys Drawa's mirrors while heading towards him, but suddenly sees his sister's image in the mirror in Drawa's eye. As Asta is paralyzed, Drawa fires a powerful spell to kill Asta. Gray, Gordon, and Henry use their magic not only to reach Asta, but also to block the spell that he fired. Henry thinks about how powerful Drawa is, but how they'll all still save Gauche. Henry then ejects Asta, Gray, and Gordon and falls towards Drawa. As Drawa comments about what Henry's planning to do, Henry destroys the base and begins to absorb Drawa and his sister's mana. Drawa is shocked by this, but he says that it's all useless while he prepares to attack Henry. As Henry tells the others that it's in their hands now, Asta says that Henry isn't dying yet. Henry remembers when he met Asta and what they talked about, and thinks about how he wants to continue living with his friends, while Asta throws his sword at Henry. The sword is actually Gray, who undoes her transformation and uses her magic to create a soft landing for Henry and herself. Asta then attacks Drawa and his sister with his Demon Destroyer sword. After knocking them to the ground, Asta prepares to free Gauche and Marie, but Drawa at the last minute tells all of them that the humans who attacked his people and how they were nothing like them. After being asked to undo the spell, Asta uses his sword to exorcise Drawa and his sister, with Drawa expressing his gratitude and saying that he'll never forget them. After Asta exorcises the spirits, Gauche chastises Asta, Gordon, Gray, and Henry for risking themselves for him and Marie, but dropping his aloof nature, he thanks them. They hug him as the rest of the Black Bulls, along with Sally and Rave, drop down from above, with Noelle and Zora joining in. After exorcising Rave, Asta happily states that the Black Bulls minus Finral were together again. As the group prepares to follow Yami into the Shadow Palace, they're attacked by two elves, but Fuegolion and Meregliona arrive and defeat the elves. As the gate to the Shadow Palace is shrinking, more possessed Golden Dawns attack, so the Black Bulls and Kirsch remain to hold them off while the captains, Asta, Noelle, and Mimosa fly to the gate, with Yuno and Charmy briefly following them into the gate right before it closes. As the Magic Knights pass through the gate, they travel through a strange space that disrupts mana, with Nozel stating that this space was the border between the living and the afterlife, which causes Asta to panic. After entering the Shadow Palace, the group is separated from one another immediately, with everyone being sent to a different area of the palace. Asta slams into a floor face first and Mimosa lands on him, smashing his head into the stone. Mimosa quickly apologizes and uses her magic to heal him. As she's healing Asta, they notice that the others aren't with them and wonder where they all are. As Asta's healed, he notices that he can use his black form again and thanks Mimosa. She then maps the layout of the Shadow Palace, which impresses Asta. Mimosa identifies that the large rooms each have an elf in them and that she and Asta are in a corridor that connects two rooms. She then says that everyone was scattered and that they'll have to defeat the elves in order to meet up with everyone else. She also notices that Licht is in the topmost room. Asta says that they'll just have to defeat all of their enemies and rendezvous at the top where the boss is. Asta and Mimosa head up to the room above them. The room is full of painted canvases floating around. Greeting them, Lyra informs them that he'll be using them to practice his painting magic until the final magic stone is put in place. Asta promises to wake up Rill, but Lyra insists that he is Lyra and he's already awake. As Lyra summons his creations from the paintings, he remarks that painting magic is much better than his original scribble magic. He declares that he'll repaint the world after all the humans are erased. Asta gets ready for battle and says that this isn't going to be easy after all. The pair are slowly overwhelmed by the number of monsters created by Lyra, so Asta carries Mimosa on his back while she heals their injuries. During the battle, Charmy appears, weaving through the attacks and blocking them with her magic, with Asta questioning Charmy about how she even got there. After this, Asta tells Charmy that Lyra is the one creating the monsters, prompting her to fly up to him and offer him food to ease his frustrations. After having her food swat away, crashing to the floor, Charmy becomes enraged and attacks Lyra with her sheep, but is still sent crashing to the ground by his monsters. After this, Asta and Mimosa both watch in shock as Charmy stands back up, this time taller, with her sheep now turned into a wolf. After seeing this and sensing her mana, Lyra thinks about how he felt this mana a long time ago, and announces that Charmy is a hybrid of a human and a dwarf, shocking everyone, including Charmy, who was surprised by this and the fact that her wolf was talking. When Lyra resumes his attacks, Charmy unleashes her new magic, as her wolf begins consuming everything that Lyra paints, and Asta comments on how he thought that she was only a cotton magic user. As the fight continues, Charmy tells Asta and Mimosa to move on ahead while she handles Lyra, with the two now headed to the next room. As Asta and Mimosa reach the next room, Mimosa notices an unconscious David. Asta asks who David is, and Mimosa informs Asta that David is a senior member of the Golden Dawn that had been possessed by the enemy. As Asta wonders who knocked him out and takes the opportunity to undo the reincarnation spell, Mimosa senses the faint remains of mana in the room, and it doesn't seem to belong to a human or an elf. As Mimosa wonders what kind of mana that was, she decides to create a replica of the Shadow Palace with her spell. Mimosa finds out that Yuno is in another room with 3 elves and a pedestal. Asta says that they should head there and thinks that Yuno should wait for them. As Asta and Mimosa finally arrive in the room, Mimosa notices the situation that's happening and wonders about the devil. Asta also notices that devil and wonders what it is, but thinks about how he may already know the answer to that question. The devil comments about how some uninvited guests have arrived, but decides to deal with them later. Patoli gets angry and tries to attack the devil, but the devil easily destroys the spell. The devil then pins Patoli in mid-air by spearing him with, well, spears. Yuno sees this and tells Asta that the devil is the mastermind behind all of this. Asta agrees with Yuno and both charge towards the devil. The devil defends himself by having the raining blade appear, which Asta and Yuno try to defend against. Asta notices that there are real blades mixed in and tries to dodge them since his anti-magic won't work on them. However, the two are easily sent crashing to the floor and then are crushed even further into the ground due to his magic, with the devil mocking Patoli and explaining how easy it was to revive and fool him and the rest of the elves. Both Asta and Yuno get back up and express how their dreams would never lose to a piece of trash like him, with both of them making short work of his blade attacks together and strike him as well. As Asta and Yuno manage to crack the devil's arm, he uses his Kododama magic to heal his wound. Zagred is impressed that they were able to wound him and comments on Yuno and Asta's powers. Zagred turns his attention back to Patoli and explains how a 5-leaf clover is born, while Patoli's 4-leaf clover turns into a 5-leaf. With the 5-leaf grimoire now complete, Zagred plans to enter the real world and unleash his true form and power. He explains that after his failed attempt 500 years ago, he used the corrupting effect of a forbidden reincarnation magic to make the process easier. As Zagred takes the grimoire, Asta and Yuno rush forward to stop him, but he says that he's not their opponent and tells Patoli to go on a rampage, freeing the elf from the iron spears. The elf who's given into his hatred and despair has turned into a dark elf. Patoli uses demon light magic to attack Yuno and Asta. Yuno's cut when he tries to dodge as the black light is faster. Asta is pushed back into a wall and survives due to his overflowing anti-magic weakening the attack's power. Zagred decides to exit through the corridor in the ceiling. Asta tells the devil not to leave, but Patoli suddenly attacks, forcing Asta to deflect the strike. Yuno uses this chance to attack with Spirit Storm, but Patoli dodges the spell and throws swords at Yuno and loops back to attack Asta again. While blocking the thrust, Asta tells Patoli that they might not forgive each other, but they're still able to understand each other. Asta tells him to get out of their way and pushes him back with his sword. Asta and Yuno both manage to stop the attack, however, Patoli begins to charge up for another one. Before he's able to finish, however, Nozel appears and blocks the attack with his magic. Nozel then tells him that he can't win against him since his Mercury magic has a better affinity against Patoli's light magic. As Patoli launches another spell at Nozel, Nozel counters by creating shields that reflect the light. Nozel then starts to launch Mercury at him, but Patoli uses his magic to dodge it all. Nozel compliments him on his ability, but that his preparation is now complete. Nozel casts a spell that traps Patoli and continues to attack him. As Patoli continues to dodge the prison's attacks, he decides to attack Nozel. As Patoli launches spells at him, the prison reflects the spells back at him. As Patoli's defeated, Nozel tells Asta and Yuno that he'll be the one to become the Magic Emperor. Nozel then plans to finish Patoli off, but Asta and Yuno convince Nozel to let Asta use his sword on Patoli since Patoli is using Vengeance's body. As Asta uses his sword on him, Asta's consciousness is pulled into Patoli's mind and he sees all of his memories. Asta then confronts him and convinces him to continue to fight and not give up. After both of them wake up, they both agree to work together to stop Zagred. When a demonic creature pours down from the chamber above, Patoli recognizes it from the Devil's World. It absorbs his attacks and a piece of it falls on his arm, burning him and draining some of his mana and life force, so he's surprised when Asta emerges from the pile unscathed. Nozel assigns the boys to go after Zagred, while he and Mimosa evacuate everyone else. Asta, Yuno, and Patoli arrive at the top floor to see that Licht is already fighting against Zagred, and Zagred notices their arrival and comments about how Patoli's transformation has come undone, while also thinking that Asta's anti-magic will be troublesome. Suddenly, Lumiere Silvermillion Clover and Secre Shallowtail burst into the room when Zagred says that he's surprised to see Lumiere again. Yuno informs Asta who Lumiere is, while Secre informs Lumiere who Asta and Yuno are. The two new arrivals notice Licht and head over to examine him. After the examination, Secre uses her magic to unseal Licht's soul. Once Licht's soul is unsealed, Licht thanks Lumiere for what he had done back then. Lumiere, Licht, and Secre head over to Asta, Yuno, and Patoli. Licht talks with Patoli about what Patoli had done and hugs him while commenting about how even though Patoli made mistakes, he did help out their people. Licht and Lumiere then turn to Zagred and comments about how they'll finally settle things from 500 years ago. As the devil has his creature attack them, Lumiere and Licht each use spells to destroy the creature. Lumiere manages to land a blow on Zagred, but the devil counters by conjuring a trident and ripping off Lumiere's arm. Before Zagred has the chance to finish attacking, Asta charges into battle and counters his trident with his sword. Zagred uses his magic to force Asta away and has it rain swords at him. As Asta starts to counter the swords, Lumiere, Licht, Yuno, and Patoli show up to help him. Secre then helps Lumiere by using a spell to reattach his arm. Asta is amazed by what Secre did and comments about how he feels that he knows her, but Secre tells him to focus on the battle. As Zagred comments about how worthless all magic is against him, Secre tells the devil that he'll be taken down by the people that he sees as worthless. Zagred says that they should speed things up, commenting about how the only exit is on this floor and that the ones on the lower floor will be consumed by his creature before they finish them. Licht tells Zagred that all of their power will finish the devil off, with Licht using his sword to absorb all the power of the elves. After doing so, Licht unleashes a spell and obliterates Zagred's body. As the others are amazed by what Licht has done, they notice that the devil's heart is still intact. Zagred then uses his magic to restore his body. Asta thinks about how powerful Licht's sword is and wonders what the sword is capable of doing. Asta decides to unleash his power and releases his anti-magic. Lumiere notices Asta's sword, and Secre informs Lumiere that Licht's grimoire has become a 5-leaf grimoire and that another devil might dwell within Asta's sword. As Asta tries and fails to unleash and control the power in his sword, Yuno uses the remnant magic in the air to create a sword that's capable of harming the devil's creature, while asking Asta how long he plans to lag behind and to stop fooling around with his power and control it before he leaves him behind. Asta replies that he just figured it out and uses his anti-magic to upgrade his sword. As Lumiere thinks about what Yuno had done and wonders who Asta is, which Secre tells Lumiere that Asta is someone that's worked harder than anyone else in the kingdom while not giving up. Zagred has his creature attack, and Asta and Yuno easily counter it. Yuno uses his magic to push Asta towards Zagred, and Asta manages to pierce the devil with his sword. Suddenly, multiple mouths appear all over Zagred's body and uses them to force Asta away. While Patoli defends against the creature, Lumiere and Licht tell Patoli that they're leaving this area in his care while they help the others on the lower floor. As Zagred says that it's now over, Asta and Yuno tell him that it's not finished until they take care of the devil. Secre thinks about how she originally wanted to use Asta, but changed her mind after seeing all the hard work he had put in and tells Asta to win. Zagred and his creature attack Asta and Yuno, and the two easily counter the attack. Asta and Yuno head toward the devil, but Asta suddenly feels a pain and notices that he's reached his limit. Yuno notices Asta and wonders if he's already at his limit. Yuno tells Asta that he'll leave him behind if he can't keep up and heads towards Zagred, and Asta quickly chases after him. The devil sees this and thinks about how Yuno can't cut through his heart. Zagred notices that Asta's gotten behind him and thinks about how Asta used the remnants of the shredded magic in order to get behind him. Asta and Yuno manage to reach Zagred and cut into him. Suddenly, Asta's black form comes undone, and Asta thinks about how he's reached his limit. Zagred forces Yuno away and then starts to taunt Asta. Yami then launches his spell and manages to cut the devil in half. While the others are shocked by his appearance, Zagred is confused about how this can happen. Secre uses this chance to heal Asta's wounds with a spell and thinks that Asta should be able to summon his anti-magic. As Zagred goes to attack, Yuno shows up and stops him. Asta then uses a spell to cut the devil in two, finally ending the battle. Licht, Lemuel, Silvermillion, Clover, Patoli, and Secre Swallowtail are all shocked by the sudden victory. A portal appears and drops the assorted magic knights and elves on top of Asta and Yuno. Suddenly, Yami shows up with Charlotte, Revchi, and Gelder Poisot in tow. Asta notices that Revchi and Gelder are with the captains. Lemuel is fascinated by the odd magic and considers the Clover Kingdom to be in good hands. With everyone gathered, they all head to the exit. While they're all exiting the Shadow Palace, Charmy tightly hangs on to Yuno, much to Sylph's anger. Asta notices that Charmy has returned to normal and comments on it, and Charmy replies that she's always been like this. Asta and Mimosa become confused by this and wonder if they're seeing things. As everyone begins to enjoy their victory in the Shadow Palace, Nozel comments that the battle isn't over yet. Once they arrive back in the kingdom, Nozel tells them that they all have to stop the rampaging elves that are still trapped by the revenge ruse that they were all tricked into. Noel wonders how they can stop them, and Mereoleona suggests that they roast them all. Asta's frustrated since he's too worn out and unable to use all of his power. Patoli says that they still have a chance since Licht and William's magic will be able to reach everyone in the kingdom. Valtos appears before Patoli and gives him William's grimoire, which Patoli thanks him for. Valtos also comments about how it doesn't matter who Patoli is, since it was Patoli that had saved him that day. Patoli then asks Asta to undo his reincarnation with his demon destroyer sword, and Asta asks if he's okay with this. Patoli tells him that doing this will help him repent for everything that he's done, since simply just disappearing will hardly be enough for him to atone for everything. Patoli tells him that he'll be leaving and asks Licht to take care of the rest, which Licht says that he will. Asta then uses his demon destroyer sword on Patoli, and Patoli thinks about how happy he is that he was able to fight with everyone again. As William awakens, he notices that Patoli has laid his anger and grief to rest and passed on. William then thinks about how it's not over yet and that there's still something only he can do, and he starts to use his world tree magic. As William starts to spread the magic throughout the kingdom, William thinks about how he wasn't able to believe in the future of the kingdom when he had glimpsed Patoli's past. William also thinks about how it was his weakness that brought on his war, and that now he must create the foundation in order to end it. Once it's complete, William and Licht combine their magic to reach all the elves and reveal the truth to them all. Licht then tells Asta to use the Demon Destroyer sword on the tree, and Asta does. As the reincarnation magic becomes undone throughout the kingdom, Asta tells Licht that the grimoire and the swords in them are his, and Licht says that the grimoire already belongs to Asta now, and to let it travel with him down whatever path lies ahead in his future. The elves then pass on and thank the present-day Magic Knights of the Clover Kingdom for what they've done, as the rest of the kingdom is finally exorcised of the elf spirits. Later, the Magic Knights begin to help the citizens of the kingdom, while commenting how the long battle is over. Mimosa heals Asta on top of a tower, while Noel comments about how Asta had pushed himself too far once again. Lumiere expresses his gratitude for their help while dealing with the devil, while also thinking about how they used the power of another devil. Noel and Mimosa wonder who these two weird people that just suddenly showed up are, and also that Lumiere looks like the statue of the first Magic Emperor came to life and is now talking to them. Asta reveals that, yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happened, before expressing to Lumiere that he will become a great Magic Emperor just like him. Asta also says that Secre is his bird, Nero, and Noel wonders if Asta had hit his head somewhere. Secre says that Asta is correct, and Noel is even more shocked by this. So to help her acclimate, I'm going to call her Nero for the rest of this video. Asta expresses how amazing Nero is for being able to transform into a human, and Nero reveals that she was originally a human. Asta wonders why she didn't say anything, and Nero says that she didn't get a chance to talk to Asta until they escaped from the Shadow Palace. Nero then pinches Asta's cheek for talking so brazenly to the Magic Emperor, and Asta asks, even though they're old good pals, if she can stop doing that cause it hurts. Lumiere tells them that he never cared about being the Magic Emperor, and that he's glad that his ideals have lived on in Asta and Yuno. He then asks which of the two will become the next Magic Emperor, and Asta eagerly expresses that it's going to be him. Nero says that Asta and Lumiere are on completely different levels, and Asta's shocked by her response. Lumiere's body starts to crumble, and he says that his mana is starting to run out. Noel, Mimosa, and Asta are shocked by this, and Mimosa wonders if her magic can help, but clearly it can't. Lumiere asks Nero to do her part in guiding the kingdom towards their ideal, and Nero expresses her desire to stay with Lumiere forever. Lumiere thinks about how he feels such content that he was able to meet his own descendants. Nero tells Lumiere that she was happy to be able to serve him, and Lumiere says that it was the same for him and thanks her for all of her hard work, before crumbling into dust. Asta, Mimosa, Noel, and Nero watch as Lumiere's body crumbles away. The next day, in a part of the Clover Castle's wall, Julius and Yami call together a meeting with Asta, Noel, Mimosa, and Nero, who are uncertain who the little kid standing in front of them is. Julius explains that the kingdom is faced with 3 problems, the first of which being the apparent lack of a magic emperor, with Yami pointing out that Julius is in fact the kid, surprising the others. Julius explains that his magic power and grimoire are limited and that his influence with the nobles is weakened. He then explains the other 2 problems, the second of which being that a foreign nation will destroy the Clover Kingdom if it doesn't change. Asta wonders if it could be the Diamond Kingdom or another country. Julius then says that the third and last problem is that Asta's going to die and that both could happen. Asta and Noelle are left stunned by this revelation. After hearing this, Asta immediately panics and asks why he's going to die, and Yami explains that Julius is usually right about these things and jokingly bids Asta to rest in peace, with Asta asking why Yami is so sure that he would end up dead. Asta asks Julius what the meaning of all this is, and Julius responds that Asta's power comes from a devil. Asta then remembers feeling a similarity between his black form and the devil he defeated in the Shadow Palace, with Noelle and Mimosa both questioning Asta about whether he's okay, to which he says he's fine. Yami's creeped out that Asta's associated with the devil, and Asta points out that Yami's bluntness hurts. Julius then explains how the horns that Asta obtains in his black form is a sign of the curse called Weg. Julius explains how the curse is from someone using the power from the realm of the devils. And Nero explains how she obtained horns from using a forbidden spell, and now she's able to transform into a bird at will. He then hears Julius explain about the 3 kingdoms bordering the Clover Kingdom and how the Spade Kingdom would likely take the opportunity to attack now that the Clover Kingdom's knights are exhausted and divided from the battle with the elves. Asta says it was all the devil's fault, and Julius explains how the Magic Parliament will condemn the devil's power and make Asta the scapegoat since he uses the power of a devil. Asta wonders who runs the Magic Parliament, and Julius says that the Royal House of Kira is in charge of that. Several days after meeting with Julius, Asta and Nero are called to the Magic Parliament building for a talk. Though Asta figures it'll just be a normal chat to inform them of the events that occurred, he and Nero are immediately handcuffed by some guards and are brought before the Magic Parliament and its chairman, Damnatio Kira. Damnatio intentionally reveals Asta and Nero's status, with Asta as an orphan peasant and Nero's history being unknown, and with their unknown magic powers, as well as the fact that Nero has horns, which means that she's delved into forbidden magic. This causes the members of the court, who are all noble and royalty, to immediately distrust Asta and Nero, and that causes Nero to remark how despite Julius's best efforts, he couldn't change the views the upper class have on non-nobility. Damnatio approaches Asta and quietly tells him that either he'll take the fall for the possessed magic knights as a devil user, or the possessed magic knights will pay for the actions they committed while under the control of the elves. Damnatio feels assured about this because his magic lets him know that Asta is the person who will not let the other magic knights die. Damnatio then asks Asta about this supposed devil, which though Asta tells him that he's not able to show him as no one but a small group of people saw the devil, Nero prevents Asta from talking about his own devil, and Damnatio announces aloud to the parliament members that since there's no devil, that they'll just have to punish the possessed people. He then brings out Marie and the plans to have her executed to provoke Asta into saving Marie, thus revealing his demonic powers. The plan works, as Asta immediately uses his form to stop the executioner. Asta states that he refuses to accept Damnatio's sense of justice, to which Damnatio replies that the people will never see cooperation with a devil. One might say that Asta is damned either way. Oh man, that was terrible, but I had to throw it in there. Damnatio then tells Asta to surrender in order for the formerly possessed magic knights to avoid facing charges for what happened during the elves' assault on the kingdom. However, the Black Bulls break into the courtroom from the side of the building and tell Damnatio to release Asta and Nero as they belong to their squad regardless of their demonic presence surrounding them. Nero tries to get them to take Asta and leave, but they assure her that she's also a part of their group regardless of her attempt to use them. Damnatio breaks up the group conversation by telling them that their actions won't make Asta's situation better, but only worsen the charges placed on him. He then uses his Scale magic spell, Scale Regulate, to weaken their magic to a balanced level to prevent their interference. However, Asta pulls out his Demon Destroyer Sword's ability to cancel out Damnatio's ability on the Black Bulls. Damnatio is shocked by this new ability, which allows Yami to move in to try to knock him out. Suddenly, Fuegoleon and Nozel come down to break up the confrontation while also bringing in Julius's new order from the Black Bulls to investigate the devils. As Nozel and Fuegoleon are royals, this convinces the Magic Parliament to allow Asta to prove his innocence, ending the trial. Damnatio cautions Asta that he'll still be executed if he fails. Although Asta is relieved that everything is over, he's still confused and he asks Yami exactly what's going on, with Yami telling him to get ready to take a trip out of the kingdom to prove his innocence. Asta and Nero later accompany Yami to see Charlotte Rosalie in order to ask her more about the curse. However, the conversation ends with the Blue Rose captain running out of the building from Yami to the shock of everyone, including Yami himself. Later, Asta accompanies Yami to Blue Rose's base to try to ask again, with Charlotte trying to confess her true feelings to Yami, only for him to mistakenly think that she must really hate him. Asta tells Yami that he's wrong and that he doesn't get the feeling that Charlotte dislikes Yami. Yami grabs a hold of Asta and is all like, "I don't recall asking for your opinion." Asta explains that he gets the same feeling that Noelle has with him, which is trust. Asta also explains how it's harder for Charlotte to be honest with him, the more that she trusts and relies on him. Yami asks if Asta is now embarrassed about proclaiming that Noelle trusts and relies on him. Asta replies that he and Noelle are comrades that have walked the line between life and death and have come out on top countless times together. Asta also says that Noelle just can't be honest with herself. Asta then pats Charlotte on the back and tells her that she should just be like she always is, since she's too embarrassed to say what she wants to say. Sol then starts to choke Asta for touching Charlotte in such a familiar manner. Charlotte comments about how they're blessed with such wonderful knights in their squads, and Yami replies that it's also because of Asta that they're currently in trouble. Charlotte then tells Asta that she heard what had happened to him and apologizes for it, but Asta tells her that it's not her fault since she was possessed. Charlotte asks Yami to join her for dinner since there's something that he wants to discuss with her. Yami agrees to it, but then thinks about how he doesn't really get what's going on here. After hearing from Charlotte about her curse, and after being told by her to look into one of his own squad members, Yami orders Asta, Gauche, and Gray to go with Gordon to talk to Gordon's family about curses. After dinner, Gordon asks his father to teach them about the devils and curses. Nathan then shows him his workshop, which horrifies them. But then he uses his magic on Asta and reveals that he's been using his research to create treatments and cures instead of curses, which surprises Gordon. Well, as surprised as Gordon can sound. Nathan then creates a map that shows the locations of curses throughout the kingdom, with one of the locations being the Black Bull's base, with Asta realizing that it might be Henry that they're seeing, and that they notice a particularly powerful one coming from in the Heart Kingdom. Yami informs his squad that they can't infiltrate the Heart Kingdom because of the kingdom's trap magic at their borders. Noelle tells Yami that Mimosa had been to the Heart Kingdom and that they're currently studying there too, so Yami tells Finral to get on it. After heading to the Golden Dawn's base, Asta and Noelle meet with Mimosa about her time in the Heart Kingdom. Mimosa tells the two that she had studied abroad with her brother in the Heart Kingdom and explains everything that she experienced while there. Mimosa also explains how the Princess of the Heart Kingdom's power is that she sees everything that happens within her kingdom. Mimosa then tells the two that she'll help them out by handling the applications to enter the Heart Kingdom, and they thank her for that. Sometime later, Asta, Mimosa, Noelle, Nero, and Finral are all heading towards the Heart Kingdom on a boat. As the boat enters through a fog, Mimosa explains that only those that have permission from the Heart Kingdom may enter it. As the boat exits the fog, Asta, Noelle, and Finral are amazed as they witness the Heart Kingdom in its full splendor. Elsewhere, the princess notices that the Clover Kingdom's power of the devil has arrived and comments about how she must have that power. As Finral and the others wonder where they should dock, a mage from the Heart Kingdom named Gaja greets them and tells them to just continue on. As they wonder where they can go since they've reached the end of the river, a staircase suddenly appears and the boat continues on. As they're amazed by this, Gaja reveals to them that the mist barrier and rivers are all controlled by their princess's mana zone. He also explains how since the beginning of their kingdom's founding, their rulers have pledged their devotion to the water spirit in order to borrow the spirit's power. Noelle wonders how one princess is capable of protecting a country this massive, and Gaja says that the princess is capable for now, but the future remains uncertain. Suddenly, Asta is surrounded by water and taken off the boat. As Noelle and Mimosa wonder what's going on, Gaja tells them that they need something for the sake of their own peace. Asta is pulled into the underground chamber of the Heart Kingdom and lands face first. There, he encounters a group of armored knights, a spell cast by Undine, the spirit of water. Undine apologizes for bringing him in that manner and attempts to strike Asta. More armored knights are created, and Asta activates his black form and uses Black Hurricane to wipe them all out. Undine then appears and greets Asta, calling him a devil. Undine then pulls Asta into a whirlpool and tells he has no magic and is less than a 9th stage mage, which is the Heart Kingdom's way of ranking magical power. Lower numbers are better, Asta's at the bottom rank. Undine explains these magic stages and binds Asta's hands and secures the manacles to the floor. Nero then flies in and says that magic isn't based on one person's magical talent. She uses her magic to break the chains, which surprises Undine. Asta then uses his anti-magic and key-sensing ability to find the princess and breaks down the water barrier that was surrounding her. Asta then barges into Loropechka's room and startles her, causing her to accidentally headbutt him. Undine pulls Asta away from her and comforts the princess. Loropechka explains that they were testing the magic knights, and when Asta asks about the curse they were following, the princess reveals that she's the cursed one. After Gaja brings the other knights to her palace, Loropechka asks for their help and then trips and stumbles, dropping her regal demeanor. She does that a lot. She explains the situation with the devil and asks Asta and Nero for help with their magic, explaining how because of their rare abilities, they're both considered arcane stage mages. Noelle and Asta contact Yami for permission, but he's too busy in the bathroom, and Loropechka finds that pretty amusing. Mimosa, ever prepared, then tries contacting Marx and Julius, and that works a little better. The princess and the Magic Emperor discuss the arrangement and agree to an alliance. She admits that they're all too weak to defeat the devil, so she decides to have her spirit guardians train the Magic Knights for 6 months. 6 months later, after being informed by Loropechka about a Candelo draining power from the weaker Spade citizens, Asta leaves immediately and flies straight towards the fortress. He sends the Demon Slayer sword through a window and stops a soldier who's attempting to assault one of the women. Landing in the fortress, Asta calls the Demon Slayer sword back to his hand and analyzes the situation. The soldier recognizes that Asta is a magic knight from the Clover Kingdom and mocks him for lacking the mana while forming a huge suit of armor. The soldier boasts that he can defeat Asta in an instance. To his surprise, Asta cuts through the armor and knocks him out in one blow. Asta then challenges the other soldiers and defeats them all pretty quickly. Asta introduces himself to the prisoners and reassures them that he's not going to harm them. The woman cries out about her situation and feels hopeless since they can't escape either the Grand Magic Zone or the captain possessing inhuman magic. Using his big brain detective skills and sensing that all the people are frightened, Asta claims that he'll defeat all of the soldiers, but is suddenly interrupted as the enemies drop down and start attacking. Asta quickly draws out his Demon Dweller sword and slashes the enemies using Black Slash. Sensing the captain's key up above, Asta charges through the ceiling and defeats the other soldiers present while making his way towards their captain. Asta cuts into the captain's room and the captain senses that Asta shares the power of a devil. Asta questions the captain on mistreating his own people, and the captain replies that they're mere sacrifices for the prosperity of the Spade Kingdom. Asta is suddenly paralyzed as the captain's poison magic starts spreading through his body. Asta uses the Demon Destroyer sword to erase the poison, and that astonishes the captain. Asta enters his black form and compares their level of devil power. Asta adds that he'll crush them all for sacrificing their own people, and uses Black Divider to cut through the captain's spell and the upper portion of the fortress while the image of the anti-magic devil looms above it. Meanwhile, Noelle's flying out towards the area while carrying Mimosa and Finral. Asta drags the knocked out captain down to where the prisoners are and informs them that he's defeated everyone so they can relax now. Noelle reaches the area and releases her spells, dousing Asta and Finral in water. Noelle complains about how hard it is in order to maintain a transport spell in a Grand Magic Zone and inquires Asta on leaving them behind. Noticing the woman who is assaulted by the Spade Soldier, Finral tries to flirt with her and backs off as he remembers that he's a one-woman man. Mimosa's Princess Healing Flower Paradise recovers the people's stamina. Noelle notices that the people are still sad since they have lost their home to the soldiers. The woman replies that the soldiers were cruel enough to kill these people who resisted and that they'll be killed immediately even if they return. Noelle smiles and asks them not to worry, as Leopold and Luck have headed to town to defeat the Spade soldiers. After retaking the town, Luck and Leopold inform Asta and the others that they finished their work, and Asta compliments them on their work and complains about how Leo's gotten taller in 6 months and how he has not. Finral marks the current location and heads to town. Observing their progress, Loropechka is happy that it ended well, but realizes that the real battle is yet to begin. The woman inquires what they're going to do in town since they need to obey the strong in order to live. Asta smilingly replies that it's their town and that the Magic Knights aren't going to be doing anything, and informs them that Finral will teleport them all back, which delights the prisoners. Asta says that their role is to defeat the devil in the Spade Kingdom. The woman reveals that the Spade Kingdom is currently being ruled by mages known as the Dark Triad, and how their strength is almost that of a devil themselves. Later, in the royal palace of the Heart Kingdom, Loropechka thanks everyone for successfully completing their mission and guarantees the safety of the town they liberated. Loropechka adds that as they gain more Spade Kingdom territory, they'll corner the devils. Although it's a difficult task, Noelle still feels hopeful since they have Loropechka's support. As the Magic Knights discuss what to do next, Asta, Luck, and Leo decide that they wish to spar with Gaja. Loropechka wants to join in the training but trips and falls. Noelle suggests that they have a bath since they returned from a long travel to a Grand Magic Zone. Loropechka, Noelle, Mimosa, and Nero decide to go for a bath, but a villager rushes in for help, stating that Charmy has appeared in the nearby forest. Finral steps in to take care of the situation, but Asta convinces him that he can take care of it. Asta summons the Demon Slayer sword and flies off from the castle, while Finral reflects on how much Asta has improved. In the forest, Asta finds a fat Charmy and tries to dissuade her from eating any more. Charmy refuses and uses her cotton magic and mana method to form a giant sheep. As Charmy continues causing trouble, the Spirit Guardian Potruf and Asta team up to go against Charmy, but they fail again and Asta gets stuck in the cotton. Rill then arrives and freezes the sheep, allowing for Asta and Rill to shatter the cotton. Rill advises Charmy to avoid overeating and then paints the goddess who saved him while he was possessed by Lyra. Asta explains to Rill that it was Charmy who saved him, but Rill refuses to believe it. Later, as Finral and Asta arrive at the Black Bull's base, which is now near the border of the Spade Kingdom, they bring with them snacks from the Heart Kingdom. They're greeted by Vanessa, Gray, and Gauche. After being greeted, Asta asks where the others are, with them stating that Gordon is still studying curse magic with his family, Henry is resting to recover his mana, and Magna and Zora are off traveling together again. Finral remembers that the captain conference will be ending soon and heads out to go pick up Yami. After Finral leaves, Henry wakes up and informs the others that there's something wrong. They then notice that their base is floating in the air, with one of the Dark Triad, Dante Zogratis, appearing before them. Dante decides to play with them until Yami arrives. Vanessa quickly sends out Rouge and the base stops moving. Henry rearranges the base and attacks with his Mana Rocket Punch, while Gauche also attacks with his large Reflect Refrain. Dante uses his gravity magic to cause the spells to fall to the ground along with everything else around him. Gauche comments about how powerful the spell was, while Vanessa says that they would have also been snapped in half if it weren't for Rouge. Dante comments about how he likes how the Black Bulls have an arcane mage that can manipulate the natural law. Asta attacks him with Black Slash, but Dante dodges it. Asta then charges at Dante and says that he'll be fighting him. As Asta fires more Black Slashes at Dante, Dante uses his Presence of the Demon King spell on the attacks, but it doesn't work. Dante dodges and thinks about how Asta's negated his magic. As Dante uses his magic to have his fallen trees attack Asta, the trees miss, and Dante thinks about how the spell that interferes with the natural law has activated again. Asta attacks, but Dante dodges and heads into the Black Bull base to find the owner of the spell, that being Vanessa. Asta charges at Dante, and Dante uses his magic to cause Asta to fall to the ground. Dante comments on all of Vanessa's attributes and demands her to be his woman. Dante of the Dark Triad. Asta suddenly appears behind Dante in his Black Asta form. Dante gets away from Asta while commenting about how there was someone that was possessed by a devil in the Clover Kingdom. Asta attacks with his Black Divider spell, but Dante dodges it. Asta uses Black Meteorite to chase Dante, but Dante uses his magic to keep himself away from Asta. Gauche comments about how they should use a spell that Dante can't avoid and uses his Mirror's Brigade spell to create multiple Astas. All of the Astas attack with Mirror's Meteorite. Dante counters by using 50% of his power and uses his magic to warp space to divert the attack, which confuses Asta and he wonders what the hell just happened. Dante steps on Asta and forces him to the ground. Dante tells Asta that they should be able to see eye to eye since they're both possessed by a devil and explains how their dark emotions make them more human. Asta disagrees with him and says that his strong heart makes him more human. Dante says that Asta is a strange devil host and tries to kill him, but notices that Rouge is on Asta's back. Vanessa says that Dante won't be killing anyone while she's around. Dante tells her that she can't use her power for anyone other than him. Dante increases his power to 60%, and that causes Vanessa to expend all of her magic, and Henry loses control of the base. As Gauche, Vanessa, and Gray are suspended in the air, Gauche thinks about how Dante is using his magic to pin them down. Dante then uses his evil god's pressure craft to create a sword, and says that he'll awaken Asta's true feelings as he pierces Gauche with his sword. Asta sees this and remembers someone calling him their son. Overcome with rage, Asta draws on more of the devil's power and attacks Dante. Dante dodges the attack and comments about how this is what makes Asta more human. As Vanessa, Gray, and Gauche fall to the ground, Vanessa thinks about how Asta's attack has negated Dante's spell within the area. Asta starts to assault Dante, but Dante dodges by continuously warping the space around him. Dante then asks his devil about the devil within Asta, since he can't ask Asta right now. The devil says that Asta's must be a low-level devil, since he doesn't sense that it's a high-level devil. Dante figures that Asta's no match for the Dark Triad, since they're all possessed by high-level devils, and uses his magic to lift large chunks of earth from the ground. Dante attacks with one of the chunks, but Asta easily destroys it. Vanessa sees that Asta's power is running wild, but they have to rely on him right now. Vanessa then turns her attention to Gauche and thinks about how he won't last much longer, while Gray is crying over Gauche and thinking about how her transformation magic is useless. As Asta continues to charge at Dante, Dante uses his evil god's pressure craft to create more swords and attacks with them. Asta uses Black Hurricane to defend himself and also fire a Black Slash at Dante. Dante warps space to dodge the attack again, but Asta predicts where Dante would dodge to and manages to wound Dante's face. Dante decides to get serious and starts to assault Asta. As their fight continues on the ground, Gray, who's reflecting on her past, manages to use her magic and heal Gauche. Suddenly, Asta falls to the ground. Dante sees what Gray has done and comments about how the Black Bulls have another arcane mage. Dante comments about how both Gray and Vanessa should both become his women, but suddenly, a dark slash divides Dante from the others. As Dante notices Yami, Yami asks him what he's doing since nobody messes with his people. Dante's glad to see Yami, along with the malice that Yami is giving off, but uses his Presence of the Demon King spell to force Yami and Finral to the ground. Yami manages to keep standing, but uses his Black Moon spell to create an area that negates the effect of Dante's spell. Dante notices how the spell works and throws a boulder at Yami, who easily cuts it in half with his Dark Cloak to Dimension Slash spell. Dante uses his heavy infighting gladiator spell to create a sword and attacks Yami in close combat. Asta, still laying on the ground, manages to regain consciousness in time to see the two fighting. As the two clash, each of them notices what the other is capable of. Dante is excited to see Yami's capabilities, and Yami asks if Dante is some kind of stalker. As the battle continues to intensify, Yami manages to inflict a major blow to Dante after using a monozone technique. However, as Yami comments about how his spells never miss, Dante laughs and uses a different magic spell to heal his wound. Dante comments about how excited he is and that nothing originally satisfied his malice. Dante also comments about how Yami is the key that would open this world to be far more magnificent. Yami wonders what Dante is talking about, so Dante explains how he needs a dark magic and world tree magic user in order to create the magic channel in order for the devils from the underworld to pour out into this world. As Dante laughs about this, Yami says that he'll have to wipe out Dante right here and now then. Yami continues to attack Dante, learning more and more about his magic and the limits of devil powers. After realizing that he needs to hit him at close range, Yami then continues to dodge and block Dante's attacks until he figures something out. Dante, however, manages to slam a chunk of earth onto Yami, but Yami gets up and proclaims that he'll surpass his limits. Asta sees the fight and becomes frustrated that he's not able to do anything. Yami stops and says that he's not able to defeat Dante. Yami also says that he needs Asta's help. Despite his previous thoughts, Asta calls forth his sword and quickly gets to Yami's side. As Dante gets excited to face the two, Yami tells Asta to follow his lead, and Asta agrees to. As the two charge, Dante tries to block their charge, but the two easily break through. As Yami manages to continue to wound Dante, Asta has trouble and needs Yami's help. Yami figures that Asta's anti-magic is the key to winning this fight, while Asta thinks about how he's holding Yami back. Asta figures that he needs all the power that he doesn't know about and manages to meet with his devil. Asta asks the devil to lend him some of his power since he knows the devil wants to defeat Dante too. The devil replies that it will lend him power, but it'll need to take control of a part of Asta's body. Asta explains how he wants someone that can come through for Yami before becoming the Magic Emperor, with his right arm now transformed due to the power he gained from the devil. As Dante launches his Gravity Singularity spell, Asta uses the power of the devil to destroy the spell and proclaims that this is everything that he has right now. The devil explains the power that Asta is wielding is more powerful than the dribble that he was giving him, and that Asta will only have 50 seconds to use it, and Asta replies that that's long enough. Asta manages to land a hit. Dante notices that he can't heal the wound that Asta landed on him, so he quickly forces Asta away and pulls off a General Grievous, creating more arms and creating swords for each hand. Yami notices that Dante is being cautious of Asta and figures that they can win if Asta lands a blow on Dante with the power that's radiating from Asta's right arm. Yami decides to put more into the fight and attacks Dante. Finral watches the fight and notices that Asta and Yami look like they're in sync, even though they're moving randomly and the two look like they're having fun. Dante says that he'll crush them and win. Dante then manages to knock Asta's sword away and make sure that Asta can't retrieve it. With 8 seconds left, Asta calls for his Demon Dweller sword, but Dante blocks it before he can reach Asta. When Asta tries to draw out his Demon Destroyer sword, Dante stops it too. With 3 seconds left, Dante attacks Asta, but Yami stops him with his death thrust. Dante says that he's indestructible and regenerates his wound while proclaiming that it's over. With 1 second left, Yami passes his katana to Asta, who grabs it and imbues it with anti-magic. Asta manages to land a slash on Dante, who falls to the ground. Dante's transformation is nullified, and a large gash stretches across his torso. As Asta collapses, Yami catches him and compliments him on a job well done. Yami then gives Asta to Finral and heads over to Dante to seal him with a spell. Suddenly, Xenon appears and retrieves Dante while also capturing Yami. He notices Asta and tries to kill him, but Finral uses his magic to divert the attack. Xenon notices that it's time to leave and opens a portal. The Black Bulls try to stop him, but he easily counters all of their attacks. Asta tries to get more power from his devil, but the devil says that Asta's too weak to handle any more. Xenon then takes Yami through the portal, which shocks the members of the Black Bulls. At a hospital in the Clover Kingdom's capital, Owen examines Asta and determines that Asta's life is not in danger and that he can't do anything about Asta's right arm. Later, Asta wakes up and notices his arm. Suddenly, Yami's katana appears from his grimoire. Remembering what happened, Asta rushes out of the hospital. However, when he steps outside, he finds that he can't move. A person appears behind him and asks where he's going. Asta wonders who that is and if their magic is restraining them. Asta says that he's going to go save Yami. The person explains that Asta is no match for Dante Zogratis on his own, and that there are 2 other devil hosts who are just as strong as Dante. The person also says that Asta's devil has given up on him, and that Asta doesn't even understand his own arm. The person explains how going there isn't courageous, it's just stupid and reckless, and then goes on to say that he knows a lot about Yami and that he's an idiot if he really did lose. Angered by the statement, Asta attacks this person but is quickly restrained to the ground. The person says that a human who can't defeat him won't be able to rescue Yami, which reminds Asta of the devil calling him weak. Asta starts to cry and wishes to be stronger. The person calls Asta a fool, but admits to liking him because he is a good person. He then takes off his hood and introduces himself as Nacht Faust, the vice captain of the Black Bulls, as well as revealing that he knows how to use a devil's power. He then introduces his devil before releasing his spell on Asta. Asta asks where he's been, with Nacht explaining that he's been undercover in the Spade Kingdom the whole time, as well as stating that the other reason he hasn't met with the other Black Bull sooner is because of his personal hatred for Yami, which surprises Asta. Asta then asks to learn how to use his devil's power, but Nacht refuses and instead insists that he rest. The next day, Nacht slips into the captain's meeting and interrupts, complimenting their motivation but criticizing the mess they made of the meeting. He rises up out of a shadow with Asta under his arm. The captains move to attack the intruder, but Nacht uses his devil power to summon 4 masked beasts to stop him. Julius vouches for Nacht's identity, and Jack notes that Nacht's magic has changed. Nacht hands over the documents from Dante's room and explains the process for the magic channel. Rill wonders why the Dark Triad are doing this, and Nacht claims that they're evil and their motivations are incomprehensible. In order to retrieve Yami and William and stop the Triad's plans, Nacht wishes to train Asta and his anti-magic to build a team around him. Nacht explains his plans to slip into the castle, lists the Dark Triad's names and magic, and adds that the team will have to be limited in size. When Yuno requests to be on the team, Nacht asks who Yuno is since he was visited by a resistance member from the Spade Kingdom. Yuno reveals that he's the purported prince of the Spade Kingdom. However, he wishes to seek revenge on Xenon Zogratis for the sake of William Vengeance and the Golden Dawn squad. After hearing this, Asta says that Yuno is still Yuno, even if he is the Golden Dawn's vice captain or a prince of the Spade Kingdom. Nacht likes Yuno and Sylph's tenacity and power and agrees to the request. Nacht announces that the team will leave on the morning of the 3rd day. Asta then tells Yuno that they'll defeat the Dark Triad and rescue their captains. Nacht then leaves the meeting after informing everyone of the situation happening in the Heart Kingdom. After meeting with the other Black Bulls and informing them of the situation, Nacht then rejoins Asta with his shadow magic, then takes Asta to an abandoned house that was owned by a former noble. They enter a room of the house and Nacht touches the floor and pulls them into a secret chamber, where Nacht plans to teach Asta everything he knows about devil magic for the next 2 days, which excites Asta. Nacht explains that Asta has not been using his full power of his devil, and that they'll use the Devil Binding Ritual, a forbidden ritual whereby one makes a contract with the devil and formally makes its power their own. Oh, that's why he's called Faust. This ritual requires a relic connected to the devil, and Nacht notes that Asta's arm, grimoire, and body are already connected to the anti-magic devil. As soon as Asta steps into the magic circle, Nacht summons the devil out of Asta, causing Asta's right arm to disappear. The devil is surprised that Asta would willingly release him. Nacht then tells Asta to fight the devil and win. Asta doesn't wish to fight and instead thanks the devil for his help during Asta's previous battles. Liebe points out that he took Asta's arm, but Asta brushes it off as part of their bargain. The devil says that he'll kill Asta and summons the Demon Slayer sword from the grimoire. He then coats the sword in anti-magic, enlarges the blade, swings it down next to Asta, and smacks him with the flat of the blade. Asta still refuses to fight, so Nacht informs him that if he loses, the devil will take his body and transform him into a monster, which Nacht will have to kill. Nacht dismisses Asta's concerns since they only have 2 days to improve Asta's abilities. The devil interrupts their conversation and swings the sword at Asta's head. Asta ducks and the sword smashes into a pillar. Nacht tells Asta that the devil will kill him, which Asta refutes, saying that the devil's key has no killing intent. When Nacht comments that devils can't have good hearts, Liebe agrees that all devils are scumbags. Sensing that Liebe is different from Zagrid, Asta disagrees that being a devil means being evil. Asta's words and appearance remind Liebe of Richita. The memories of his torturous time in the underworld, his happy life with Richita, and the sudden interruption by Lucifero infuriate Liebe, who declares that he'll steal Asta's body and kill every devil. Sensing the hatred and sadness in the devil's key, Asta pledges to accept those feelings and defeat the devil in a fight. The devil considers it a joke and throws the sword at Asta, who dodges to the side and then punches the devil's face. Liebe summons the other swords from the grimoire, but Asta grabs Yami's katana and wields it to fend off the other swords that come flying at him. Liebe recollects how his malice grew while in the grimoire and he developed anti-magic. Meanwhile, Asta recalls the fights he's had against and alongside other swordsmen and copies their movements in order to close the distance with the devil. Asta easily overcomes the devil in close quarters combat, striking the devil multiple times and knocking the demon dweller's sword from his hand. Asta follows up with a thrust that strikes the devil's forehead. Liebe falls backward, and Asta stands over him and declares victory. A collar appears around Liebe's neck, and 4 chains pull him up onto his hands and knees before Asta. Noct congratulates Asta for winning and informs him that he can make any contract that he desires and he can totally subjugate the devil. Asta requests that the devil become his friend. Both Liebe and Noct are confused, and Asta explains that he's been able to fight because of the devil's power and wishes to learn more about the devil. Despite Noct's warning about the devil possibly turning on him, Asta points out that he could sense the devil's character through Ki. The collar and chains disappear as Asta reaffirms his desire to make a contract of equals. Asta holds out his hand and asks for the devil's name. Liebe reflects that Asta is truly Richita's son and introduces himself, shaking Asta's hand. Matching markings then appear on their left wrists, and Asta's right arm returns. Stepping into the circle again, Noct smiles and tells Asta that the contract is unprecedented and foolish, but correct. He then merges with his devil and challenges Asta and Liebe as a continuation of their training. Noct tells them that the only way for Asta to get stronger is to draw out all of his devil's power, and to achieve this by uniting. Using his magic, he surrounds them both in shadows. Asta enters his black form to get out of the spell and wonders where Liebe is. Liebe, in miniature form, tells Asta he's on his shoulders. He explains that he thinks his current form is what happens when Asta uses anti-magic. Noct says that their current condition is not union. Asta asks Liebe how he can use the latter's real power. Unfortunately, Liebe answers that he doesn't know how, as he's never come out to fight before. They start arguing with each other until Noct interrupts. He tells them that they'll have to figure this out as they go along. He attacks them with a spell called Pack. Noct tells them that the shadows won't go away until they defeat him. As he cycles through his swords, Asta thinks about how his connection with Liebe is stronger, but Noct points out that drawing out the power won't be easy for Asta since Liebe isn't his servant. After grabbing Yami's katana, Asta says that he'll surpass his limits, which irritates Noct, disrupting his ki. Asta senses the disturbance and sends a flying anti-magic slash, which cuts the edge of Noct's cloak. Asta decides to name the katana the Demon Slasher Katana and restates that he's going to surpass his limit, which irritates Noct even more. After 2 days, Asta and Liebe continue to fail, and Asta notes that the injuries he receives in his black form are shared with Liebe now. The 2 eat cookies filled with healing magic from the Spade Kingdom's resistance. Once their wounds are healed, Asta suggests a lame idea that Liebe goes along with on the off chance of it being successful. When it too fails, Asta and Liebe begin bickering, but Noct interrupts and informs them that their time is up. He then engulfs the 2 with his Dark Prison Hunting Ground spell. As Noct attacks them, Asta enters his black form and notices that he can't dodge the attacks since he can't sense their ki. As Noct continues his attacks, Asta and Liebe wonder why they can't unite and think about why they want to get stronger. They both resolve not to let the other die. In that moment of shared desperation and determination, Asta and Liebe manage to unite, shining within the darkness of Noct's spell. Asta manages to release a single slash that cuts through Noct's spell and negates part of Noct's transformation, even though the slash didn't even touch him. Impressed by anti-magic and Asta's potentials, Noct admits defeat. Although Asta and Liebe have achieved a union, Noct refuses to let them join the mission yet since they need more time to master it. Noct leaves his devil behind to continue their training. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring that bell to be notified about our latest videos.